8 silver, 1 coin at a time, with a pause after each so I can hear it land on the board. The man doing the counting is in no hurry at all. He wants the sound to do his talking for him. That is what you cost, he says, in case anybody has told you otherwise. Nobody has told me anything. 11 minutes ago, I am on the afterdeck of a crab boat in a following sea with 400 pounds of pot coming over the rail and a man screaming at me about a lamp. Now I am sitting on a reed mat in a room built on poles over brown water, in a shirt cut for somebody with narrower shoulders and a worse trade. Cheaper than my boots, I say. He taps the rail twice with his knuckle before he answers. He does that before everything he says, and a man who does that has told you when to start listening. The boots came off the debt boat with you, he says. So did what you owe. Toller Kessel 31, eldest, owns the scale end of this pier and keeps a length of oiled rope going round and round in his hands indoors. There is a girl in the doorway, and she has been there since the second coin, and nobody in this room has said her name. She holds the frame high up with 2 fingers, the way you hold a thing whose shape you already have by heart. What were you told you were getting, she says. A wife, I say. That is not the question I asked, she says, and she does not come off the frame while she says it. No, I say. It is not. Her name is Ione, and I get it off her mother, who uses it the way you use a peg. The mother comes past her with a bowl, sets it down in front of me, and stays standing there to watch me eat it. Half a bowl, reed rice and the parts of a fish a man on a wage throws at a gull. This house runs like every galley I have eaten in, and whoever holds the ladle holds the room. How much does the fish weigh, I say. Merle Kessel tells me a fish does not weigh anything. A fish is a fish. Then we can weigh it, I say. 4 people are in that room, and not one of them hears a war start. In the morning, Toller hands over the family spare, a skiff with a plank sprung at the 3rd frame and a bailing can lashed to the thwart with somebody's belt. The inside water is yours, he says. We call it the slack. Nobody works it because nobody has to. A mooring on the good side of this pier is 5 coppers a week, he says, pricing it while he is still holding the painter, and the bought-in does not get one at any price. Half the pier is out on those planks, and none of them are there for me. They are there for the arithmetic. Nettle Onslow explains the delta tide to me for as long as it takes me to untie. He is 22 and thorough. I am off a coast with a 19-foot tide. He gets as far as the water going out, then starts from the top again because I glance down at the sprung plank. Piet Vane is at the town end with a boat hook worn thin at the neck. The cut belongs to anybody who can go into it, he says, to nobody at all. Every man on the boards laughs and the Kessels laugh longest, and it is useful to me because now I know which sentence they fear. Yet does not laugh. 68, half deaf, the last man into the cut and out of it again, and he looks at that water the way you look at a bill you have decided not to pay. 22 years on top of water, and I have never once been in it. Crabmen do not learn. Crabmen drown in sight of their own hull, and everybody at the funeral says so out loud, every single time. And that is the one thing here that frightens me, and it is not going into anybody's ear. I put the skiff past the last bar. On the boards, nobody moves. Toller Kessel watches the skiff go past the sand and says nothing at all, and the rope keeps going round in his hands. Bet Onslow sets her brass weight on the plate and leaves her hand flat on it. Sook Marin says the word bar out loud, once, into her own frying pan. Nobody answers her, so she says it again. Past the bar, the brown goes deep and stops arguing with itself. A sawnose hunts the top of that water, which means he has to come up, and he turns the way a barn door turns. Anything that has to come up will tell you where it is, and anything that turns badly can be made to turn. So I put a whole fish on the line and let him find it, and he comes at the skiff on the surface with a foot of nose clear of the water and half the river piling off his shoulders. He is longer than the boat. I have 22 years of not being paid to be impressed. I let him start his turn, then put the hull across the middle of it so he is bent round the skiff with his own weight fighting him, and I get the hook into the gill from above. The gill is the only place on him not made out of teeth. Then he takes me down the current for the length of the town. The skiff goes past that pier faster than any rotten skiff has gone past a pier, with the plank at the 3rd frame complaining and 200 people turning their heads together like one animal. I come back up the eddy standing on him. The boards make no sound. Not one plank creaks, and Nettle Onslow says nothing at all. And on this pier, there is no rarer event than that. It takes 7 men to get him onto the scale, and 4 of them are Kessels who came down to watch me drown. Bet Onslow works that scale. 44, wet paper apron, frying oil in her hair, and a brass weight no other hand is allowed to touch. 210, she says. 210. She says every price twice, and none of it has anything whatever to do with me. 9 coppers a hundred weight is what that scale pays for common river fish. She stands with her hand on the beam and tells me she has no rate for this one because nobody has ever brought one in to be rated. Toller comes down the boards, taps the rail twice, and says nothing. The pier notices that harder than it noticed the fish. And he prices me a second time in one morning, in front of the same crowd, and he does it politely. No mooring, he says. Not on the good side, not for 5 coppers a week, not for 50. You can tie at the town end with the bait boys. On his way past, he sets a coin down on the rail the way another man would spit. So the boards get to watch the number arrive, and then watch it fail to buy me a rope's width of pier, and Bet says 210 again into the middle of that, and it lands nothing like it landed the first time. Ione is at the top of the ladder with her hand out, feeling for the post. She has come down 2 flights of somebody else's stairs on a morning when the whole town is shouting, and she has done it without touching one person on those stairs. I break a piece off the nose where the saw teeth start and put it into her hand so she can have the size of it. "That is not a fish," she says. "No," I say. "Then what is it?" "Dinner," I say. She runs her thumb along the teeth twice, counting them, and the boy standing behind her makes a noise and steps back out of it, and she does not move at all. Her mother has already sent the second brother down for the good part of it. Sabe Kessel is 26, built like a bollard, and he says the last 3 words of everything anybody says to him. "Take the head up," I tell him. He says up and takes the head up. That night, I put a plate down in front of Ione before anybody else in that house has been served, off my own catch in the middle of her mother's own table. Merle Kessel has the little scale out. She keeps it beside her at meals, 2 brass pans on a beam, and she portions the house on it and calls that fairness. 60, boiled reed and lamp smoke, and the only person in Pilewater who frightens taller. The scale is on the table. The plate is already down in front of her daughter, and the fish on it has not been weighed by anybody. Merle looks at it a long moment and then serves her sons. Toller taps the rail as he comes in and finds nobody waiting for the sentence, because every head at that table is turned toward a plate. Ione eats. She eats like somebody who has done the arithmetic on her own dinner every night since she was 14 and got the same answer every time. While she is eating, something comes up under the skin on the inside of my forearm. Dark, warm, spreading slow, like a rope burn arriving an hour after the rope. I put my sleeve down over it. I have no notion what it is, and I am not going to be the man in this house who asks. What I do know is that my chest is wrong. I sit at that table breathing like a man who has stopped halfway up a hill, and I have not stopped, and there is no hill. Sook Marin fries the rest of him at her own fire, and Pilewater eats him standing up in the dark out of wet paper, and I stand at the edge of it with my sleeve down and watch a town that spent the morning laying odds on my funeral chew a thing not one of them will go near, and every one of them looks out at the water while they do it, and then looks back at me, and nobody says a word to me for the better part of an hour, except to ask for the salt, which they ask for twice. She charges me 3 coppers for a bowl that costs 2. When I hold the third one up, she takes it with 2 fingers and tells me the extra is for the stall boy. There is no stall boy. She asks my name and I give it once. "Cal Brannock," I say. She nods, and 2 breaths later, she is telling a reed cutter with 1 shoe on that the bought-in wants another bowl. The carter who brings ice up from the coast will not extend me credit on a barrel. He rubs a copper with his thumb all the time he is refusing me, and he is still rubbing it when he walks away. Later, I am out on the boards with the tide going out under my heels, working out how much weight a man can hold with 1 hand and a hemp line, and Dab comes and sits 4 feet off with his bait jar. 11 years old, wet to the shoulder, and never in his life the owner of a dry shirt. He says nothing to me, and I say nothing to him, and we sit there until the water is too low to be interesting. Inside the house, Merle is doing the washing up loudly, and she says it to Toller with her daughter standing 2 feet away, and not to her. "The Temple House at Ardenmouth has written back," she says. "The answer came up on the last ice boat, and it is a yes." Toller knocks the rail twice. "And the 8 silver," he says. "Comes back to this house the morning she goes," says his mother, and sets a bowl on the drainer, and Ione goes on drying the one in her hands with no change in the rhythm of it at all. She has heard every word. She has been hearing the price of herself said out loud in that room since she was 19, and she can say it faster than her mother can. She dries the bowl and puts it on the shelf where it lives. Then she reaches up over the door and knots nothing onto nothing, because the line over that door is empty tonight. Tomorrow, it will not be. By the time the light is gray enough to work in, the whole pier has argued yesterday over again and reached a verdict, and the verdict is luck. Sook Marin has a pot going at her counter, and it is not fish. 5 to 1, she says to the man in front of her, taking his copper with 2 fingers. 5 to 1, the bought-in comes back with nothing at all today. 210, says Bet Onslow from the scale, to nobody because somebody has stood still within reach of her. 210. "A sawnose comes up the wrong channel once in a season," says one of Toller's crew loudly. "As you say a thing you want carried down the boards. Any fool with a hook is standing there when it happens." 5 to 1 is not an opinion about fish. 5 to 1 is an opinion about me, and it is a cheaper one than 8 silver, so the town has marked me down overnight and said so with money. Dab puts a copper on me. He does it fast and low with his shoulder turned, the way a boy pays for a thing he is not supposed to want, and then goes back to scraping the pilings and does not look at me once. Bet Onslow explains the odds to Sook Marin. Sook Marin is holding the money. He gets as far as how a book is balanced when the short side is heavy, and she says yes, and he starts again because she said yes while counting. I do not put anything on myself, on account of owning a hook line, a bailing can, and a shirt that is not mine. Breakfast is on the little scale, and Merle has the 2 brass pans out on the table, and she does the house on them, and my portion comes across weighed, and hers does not. So I take up the pan she has left sitting there, put her portion into it, lift 3/4 of an ounce of reed rice off her plate to make it balance as she balanced mine. and set it down in front of her. Nobody says a word. Toller taps the rail twice and gets no sentence out of it. Sabe looks at his mother, then at the pan, and says at the pan the way a man reads a sign out loud in a strange town. That is all of it. Nobody in that house remarks on the pans this morning, and nobody remarks on them afterwards. And from here on, every meal in that room is weighed by 2 people instead of 1. Over the door, Ione is standing on a stool with the tooth in her hand, the piece I broke off the saw nose, knotting it onto a line she has strung between 2 nails. 1, she says, and runs her fingers back along the line to the bare part of it to feel how much room she has left. Then she asks me what it is like out there. 60 feet of brown you cannot see a hand into, I say. 9 coppers 100 weight for anything ordinary and no rate at all for anything that is not. 200 pounds of fish will take the shoulder out of a man who lifts it wrong, and the current under the top of it runs harder than the top does. She stands on that stool a while with her hand on the line. That is the first useful thing anybody has told me about the water, she says. 14 years of people saying it is dangerous, and not one of them ever saying what it weighed. Down on the boards, I buy bait off Dab. The going rate is a copper a jar. I give him 2, which makes me a fool in front of 9 witnesses, and he counts it into his palm and tells me that is 1. That is 2, I say. He counts it again and says 1 again, and goes off along the pilings with his jar. 11 years old, and he does that all day to everybody, and I put it down as a boy who cannot count. A widow comes down the boards while I am coiling. Hesapel, 30, a bad hat and a good grip, and she crews for whoever is paying that week and tells you so before you ask. You will want a second pair of hands out there, she says. I work alone, I say. She looks at the sprung plank, and then at the bailing can, and then at me, and she says that when I have a boat worth crewing, she will ask me again, and that she will want the money weekly and not in fish. And she goes and gets herself hired by a downriver man who is paying Friday, and she is right about every word of it, and that is not a thing I am willing to hear on a morning like this one. Down at the shore end, Piet Vane is sitting where he sits. The year I went in there was 4 of us, he says, out at the water rather than at me. Came out on my own. He starts the next sentence and it goes about 6 words and stops. He takes the pipe out of his teeth and puts it back in. He does not finish it while I am coiling my line, and he does not finish it while I am carrying my line past him. I walk straight by him and down the boards, because I am going out on a tide, and because I have never in my life asked another man a question about water. On a boat, you carry your own weight. Every man I have watched get hurt was asking somebody something first. Ione is up at the head of the ladder, and she hears me do it. She hears the pipe and the 6 words, and my boots not stopping. Past the bar, the second one does not behave like the first one at all. It comes at the line from underneath and takes it sideways, and it does not turn like a barn door. It turns like something that has done this before and did not enjoy it. It has me across the thwarts twice. The sprung plank gives another 1/4 inch, and there is brown water over my boots inside 2 minutes, and the bailing can is doing nothing for anybody, so I stop trying to bring the thing up. You cannot lift a weight heavier than you off a hull lighter than both of you. What you can do is let it fight the boat while you go the other way with the line, take the head round into the current, and let the river do the work while you hold on. I hold on longer than I would say out loud to anybody in that town. My hands go through the stage where they hurt and out the other side into the stage where they are simply shut, and the line has taken the skin off the inside of my thumb, and I do not notice until the evening. Then I get it into the shallow off the bar, where a thing that heavy cannot use its weight, and I finish it standing in water to my thighs with the skiff nudging my back like a dog that wants feeding. It is thicker than the boat, rather than longer than it. 2 of the bait boys have to come off the pilings to help me get it up onto the boards, and one of them puts a bite round his own wrist to take the strain, and that is how you lose a hand, and I take it off him without saying anything about it. Back at the scale, Toller is waiting with one hand flat on the beam. No Kessel weight touches that, he says. It is not going on this scale. This is the family's scale, the family's plate, and the family's brass. Bet Onslow has been working that scale since Toller Kessel was 9 years old. She takes up her own weight, hers and not the family's, and says so at a volume the boards can use. Then she sets it on the plate under his hand and waits with her eyebrows up until he moves the hand, and he moves the hand. And half of Pilewater watches a woman of 44 shift a man of 31 without laying a finger on him. 340, she says. 340. Then she reads the price off her own arithmetic and says that twice as well, and by the second time, the crowd is already going down the boards to see what it has done to the odds. Toller puts 2 knuckles on the rail, and this time he has something to say, and there is nobody standing still to hear it. He will not sell me a mooring at any price, and now he will not sell me one with 200 people watching either. So I tie up where the bait boys tie, and pay Sook Marin 2 coppers to keep an eye on the boat. She charges me 3. It is a 2-copper job, she says, taking the third with 2 fingers, and the third one is for the trouble of watching. At the scale, with the boards emptying, Bet Onslow is telling Ione what everything on the plate weighs, out loud, item by item, and she gets nothing at all for doing it. 9 coppers, 100 weight common, 4 for the small stuff off the bar, and this one has no rate, so I have invented one, she says. Put your hand there. Feel where the beam sits when it is heavy. That is what heavy feels like. The girl runs a finger along the beam and asks whether 100 weight of the small stuff and 100 weight of the big pay differently for the same weight, and Bet Onslow stops with her hand in the air. They do, she says. Nobody has ever asked me that on this pier. Then she explains why, and she explains it twice, and the girl gets both of them and asks a second question that is worse. 2 years ago, the girl asked her whether a scale had a sound. Nobody told Bet Onslow to stop answering, and Bet Onslow has never once stopped doing a thing nobody told her to stop. Sukmarin fries the good part of it at the stall, and the boards eat standing up, and Dab eats his piece off wet paper with River still in his hair, and it comes up my wrist while I am watching him do it. Dark, slow, warm, the same as the first one, a handspan of tide line under the skin, and the first one has not faded at all. It did not come while I killed the thing. It did not come while I hauled it, or while Bet weighed it, or while the money moved down the boards. It comes while a boy eats a piece of it in the dark with his mouth full. The door that night, Ione stops with the drying cloth in her hands. "You are breathing differently, Cal," she says. "Yesterday and today both. You come up that stair and you are not out of air at the top of it, and the first night you were." So I say it out loud, once, and she is the only person alive who hears it. "The river is not paying me for killing things," I say. "It pays me when somebody eats what I take out of it. Yesterday it paid me while you were eating. Tonight it paid while the boy was." "Paying you what?" she says. "Breath," I say. 4 minutes under this morning clearing the line off the bar, and I have never held 4 minutes in my life. She thinks about that for the length of one slow breath and then asks the only question in this delta worth asking, and the question is how many mouths. "I have no idea," I say. "Then we find out," she says, and goes up over the door and puts her fingers on the one tooth and leaves them there. Down at the stall, the pot pays out. The odds have come in to 2 to 1, and nobody will take them at that. Dab collects 5 coppers on his one and does not spend a single one of them. Sukmarin counts 3 coppers into my hand and calls it the compliments of the house, and one of them has a nick out of the rim that I put there myself yesterday, paying her for a 2-copper bowl. "Those are mine," I say. "They are winnings," she says, and goes back to her pan, and Nettle Onslow begins explaining to her how a nick gets into the rim of a copper. On the evening run, I go out to bring the line in, and the line is not there. The hook end is gone. Not frayed, not worried at, not chewed through. Cut, clean across, the way you would cut it if you had a knife the size of a door, and the standing part is still made fast to the thwart where I made it fast at noon. I sit in that skiff with 14 inches of hemp in my fist and look at the cut end of it, and the river goes on being flat and brown and entirely uninterested. Then the water lifts along the side of the boat and keeps lifting, a long swell going up the channel with no wind behind it and no hull in front of it, a wake the length of the town, and the skiff comes up on it and settles and comes up again. It passes under me and keeps going toward the cut, and I count while it goes by, and I get to 12 before the last of it is past the boat. I row in on a flat river. I tie up at the bottom of the pier. I walk up the boards past Piet Vane, who is still sitting there with the pipe in his teeth, and past Sukmarin's fire, and I say nothing about it to one living soul on that pier. The thing I bring in on the 3rd morning will not go onto Bet Onslow's plate in one piece, so it goes on in 3, and she weighs all 3 and says every number twice. 90 and 4, she says. 90 and 4. Then 160 twice. Then 202 twice. And on the 3rd one, half the boards say the second number along with her. They are not doing it to be funny. It comes out of them the way a hymn comes out of people who stopped listening to the words years ago, and Bet does not break stride for it, and Nettle Onslow explains to the man beside him why she says everything twice and gets it wrong. "That is Kessel's man," says one of Toller's crew, jerking a thumb, telling a downriver hand who the wet one at the scale is. Kessel's man. He does not mean it kindly, and he does not mean it as a promotion, and it is still 4 rungs up from the bought in. Then I go up to the house and put 8 silver back on the same board Toller counted them onto, one at a time with a pause after each, so everybody in that room hears every one of them land. "That is what you cost me," I say, in case anybody has told you otherwise. Toller knocks the rail twice and has nothing to hang on the end of it. His mother comes past him, sweeps the 8 coins off the board into her apron in one movement, and tells me the money buys the dead and not this house's opinion of me. At supper she serves her sons, then the man off Toller's boat who is eating with them, then herself, and then Ione. And she takes long enough over the order of it for the order to be a sentence. So I put my own plate down in front of Ione before I have taken a thing off it, and I sit there with a bare board in front of me and eat nothing, and Merle Kessel watches me do it and says not one word. Ione eats. Halfway down the plate, she asks her mother, pleasantly, what the temple house at Ardenmouth pays for a girl who cannot work, because she would like the figure said in front of everybody once, instead of through a wall. Nobody answers. Sabi says through a wall, quietly at his bowl, and that is the only sound in that room for a while, and Merle takes the pot off the table and puts it on the shelf behind her, where nobody else can reach it. Something comes up warm above my elbow, while her daughter is finishing the plate. I put my sleeve down over it, go out onto the boards, and stand in the dark until my chest stops feeling like it belongs to somebody else. In the morning, the scale end is shut to me. Toller is standing on the beam side of it with both hands behind him, and Bet Onslow is looking at the boards. Not the scale, he says. The scale you may use. Nobody on this pier is buying, and that is not the scale's doing, and it is not mine either. Whose is it then? I say. Every man who buys for the ice run pulls an oar for a kessel, he says. 4 boats out of 5 on these boards are ours. You have not been shut out of anything. There is simply nobody left standing here who wants what you have got. Then say the last of that again with your hand off the rail, I say. He does not. He taps it twice and tells me a bought-in man learns the pier, or the pier learns him, and Bet Onslow weighs the thing anyway and writes the figure on her own slate where there is nobody to sell it to. So I do not sell it. I carry it down to Sukmarin, put it on her counter, and tell her to fry the lot and hand it out for nothing until it is gone. She looks at the fish, then at me, and asks who is paying for the oil. I am, I say. With what? She says. With the next one, I say. She names a price for oil that is twice what oil costs, and she says it twice, and then she starts cutting, and she cuts fast enough that she was always going to. The first bowl off that pan goes to a man called Ovi Nack, who has pulled an oar for Tuller Kessel for 9 years, and Tuller Kessel is standing 4 feet away when Sook holds it out to him. Ovi looks at Tuller. Tuller taps twice on the rail, and on that pier that is an entire sentence, and every man there can read it. Ovi Nack takes the bowl and eats the fish where he stands, looking at his own employer over the top of it, and he does not hurry, and he does not apologize. And when he has finished, he says out loud that it is very good fish and goes back to work. By dark, there are 9 of them at that counter. By the next morning, there are 17, and 4 of the 17 crew for Kessels, and one of them is Toller's own bowman, who eats 2 bowls and says nothing at all. A blockade on a fish is a fine idea, while the fish is still in the water. Once it is fried and free at her counter, a blockade is only a list of the men who have to walk past it, and every mouth of it comes up under my skin. 17 men eat off that counter, and I go down the ladder that evening, breathing like a man who has been sitting in a chair all day. Then the line fouls, and it fouls on the falling tide with the whole pier out on the boards, because the boards are where you stand to watch a man be told he may not sell his own fish. A long line has taken a wrap around something on the bar, with 200 pounds hanging on the far end of it. I can cut it and lose the hook and the day, or I can go down and clear it. A hook line good enough for out there costs 15 coppers, and I have 4. 15 coppers for a line. Nettle Onslow tells me, without being asked and at some length, what a hole that could work that water properly costs out of an Ardenmouth yard, and the figure is 60 gold, and there are 12 coppers to a silver and 20 silver to a gold, and I have 4 coppers. So I take 3 turns of the standing part round my fist and go over the side, and the last thing I hear off the boards is Nettle Onslow starting a sentence about silt. Under the bar, the water is brown and close, and there is no up in it. Warm on the top, cold in bands underneath, thick with reed silt, and I get a hand on the wrap and it is round a sunk stump with a root through the bite, and clearing it takes what it takes. Up on the boards, a bait boy starts counting out loud. Bet Onslow hears him doing it, and Bet Onslow says every number twice, because that is what her mouth does with numbers. So within half a minute, the entire pier is counting in doubles. 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. 4 minutes, Ione comes off the ladder onto the boards and lays her hand flat on the post and leaves it there. At 4.5, Toller Kessel stops working the rope in his hands. At 5, Sukmarin lifts her pan off the fire, which nobody in Pilewater has seen her do at that hour, and Nettle Onslow begins explaining what happens inside a man at 5 minutes, and his mother tells him to shut his mouth, which nobody has seen either. I come up at 6 with the hook in one hand and the line clear in the other. Nobody cheers. There is a sound like 200 people setting a breath down at once, and Bet Onslow says 6 twice, and then says nothing at all for a long while, which for her is the loudest thing available. Ione's hand comes off the post. She does not ask whether I am all right, and she does not speak to me in front of any of them, and that is the kindest thing anybody does for me all week. The first theory is born at Sukmarin's stall inside a minute, and it is born because of my wrist. The band that came up over my elbow at supper has a mate now, up the inside of the forearm where a rolled sleeve stops, dark and tide-lined and 2 fingers wide, and Sukmarin has excellent eyes. River in him, says the reed cutter with one shoe. That is river coming up under him. You do not go under 6 minutes with a man's lungs, and you do not hold 200 pounds on a fist with a man's arm, and the marks on his wrist are exactly how it looks when the cut starts writing on a man. Nettle Onslow explains to him thoroughly from the beginning, with corrections, why the thing he has just invented cannot be right. And he takes so long over it that the man has time to invent a better one. Better one is that I am not the man they bought. That one goes down the boards fast, because it is nearly true. Nettle also congratulates me on how I cleared the wrap by working the bite up the stump against the current, and it is not remotely what I did. I let him have it. A man being praised for the wrong thing is being praised for free. Dab is on the pilings all through the counting, with the 5 coppers he won on me still in the jar and not one of them spent. I know they are in the jar because he rattles it when he moves, and I do not say anything about that either. That afternoon, I walk past Piet Vane for the 4th time. He is sitting where he sits with the boat hook across his knees, and he says at the water that the year he went in there was a wind out of the north for 3 days beforehand. He gets 9 words further and stops. Go past him with a coil on my shoulder, and he does not call after me. He has not called after anybody in 11 years, and I have not asked another man about water in 22. From the top of the ladder, Ione says his name out loud. "LEVIATHAN," she says, as a plain fact, the way you would say the tide is out. I ask her whether she wants the good part of tonight's up in the house or down at Sook's counter. She lets me have it. She takes the change of subject the way you take a coin you have decided not to look at, and she goes up and knots the 4th tooth onto the line, and the letting is worse than the asking would have been. She spends the middle of that day at the scale with Bet Onslow, and what she is doing there is arithmetic. If a third part of the small stuff is my share, she wants to know what that comes to by weight in her own hand, on a beam she has felt. 4 coppers a 100 weight, says Bet. 4 coppers a 100 weight, so a third part of it is not a share, girl. It is a courtesy, and I would not thank anybody for it. Then say all of it out loud, says Ione, and Bet Onslow does, twice, from the top, and the girl stands there with her fingers on the beam and puts every one of those figures somewhere she can find them again. In the storeroom, over the week's account, Toller Kessel has his mother's ledger open in front of him, and his mother's hand flat on the page. He is 31 years old. He has been reaching for the keys of that house since he was 19, and she moves them from hook to hook along the wall where he can watch her do it. The Temple House pays a fee to take a girl who cannot work, says Merla Kessel, and she says the figure, and then says what it is worth set against a season of feeding one. And the 8 silver, says Toller. Comes back to this house the morning she goes, says his mother, and turns the page. There is nothing in this account for the water past the bar, she says, and taps the empty column twice with one finger, and that is where her eldest son got it from. At supper, she has the bowl in her hands, and she does not sit down with it. Deep water belongs to the house that holds the pier, she says. This house holds the pier. My husband held it, and I hold it, and there is not one man on the Ossa who would say otherwise to my face. She sets the bowl down in front of me. So you will bring what you take out of that river to this house first, she says, and this house will say what of it goes down the ladder, and you may keep the third part of the small stuff and none of the rest. Toller taps the rail twice. Sabi says none of the rest. Ione has stopped with her hand halfway to her cup, and she has already been to the scale, and she already knows to a copper what her share of it comes to. 9 days to the water day, says Merle Kessel, when the reeve comes down to these boards, and if I ask that man to put his name to it, he will put his name to it before he has finished his second cup. For the first time since I came up off that reed mat, I have nothing to say to anybody in this room. 3 days out from the water day, Toller Kessel takes his own boat and his own 4 men onto exactly the water I work, and he tells the boards he is doing it, and he goes at dawn so that everybody sees him leave. That is not a stupid thing to do. It is the only clean way to answer me. If a Kessel hull with 4 sound men in it comes back off that water loaded, then the sawnose was weather and the bottom was standing in the right place, and the last 4 days go back in the box. He is out for 11 hours, and Sook Marin does not open a book on it, which tells you everything about what Sook Marin expects. He comes back with 140 pounds of common river fish, a fair day for that pier, and a catastrophe for that morning, and he ties up on the good side of his own boards alongside what I brought in before noon. Bet Onslow weighs his and says both numbers twice, in her ordinary voice, at her ordinary volume, and that is the cruelest thing done to anybody in this delta all week, and she does not mean a syllable of it. Nobody laughs at him. Ovinak takes the bowline off him and says, "It is good fish." The boards go quiet the way a room goes quiet when somebody's father has been proved wrong about something in front of them. At supper, Merle Kessel takes a 1/4 ounce off my portion. I take a 1/4 ounce off hers. Neither of us looks up. The pans go back on the shelf, and not one person at that table mentions the boat. Ione comes out onto the walkway that night while I am splicing an I into a new line, and she sits down on the boards with her back to the wall and gives me her arithmetic. Since I was 19, I have been worth 8 silver, she says. That is the price of a man off a debt boat, and it is what my mother paid to have me married, so that is what I am worth as a wife. The Temple House pays a fee to take a girl who cannot work, and she says the fee, and it is more than 8 silver by half. So I am worth more sent upriver than kept, she says, and I have known that for 2 years, and my mother has known it for 2 years, and neither of us has ever said it out loud until this week. I ask her when she worked it out. 19, she says, in this house, at that table, with her mother saying the number in her hearing over the washing up, and it took her the length of the washing up. 14 years old is when she learned the weight of her own dinner. 19 is when she learned the price of her own person. She says both of those in the same flat voice, and then she asks me whether it is a good line I am splicing or a cheap one. 15 coppers, I say. Good then, Cal, she says, and gets up off the boards and goes in, and I sit there with the splice half made and no notion at all what I have just been handed. The water day is not a hearing, and nothing in it gets signed. It is the biggest day of the season on the Asa, and the whole delta comes up to pile water and ties along both sides of that pier until you can walk from the town end to the last mooring across other people's decks. Sukmarin fries from before light. The reeve comes once a year, takes the crown's share off the boards in front of everybody, and drinks 2 cups of anything you put in his hand. Every single thing that anybody on that river has been afraid to say for a season gets said out loud on the water day in front of 200 people, and that is not the accident of the day, it is what the day is for. Reeve Halloran's speak comes down the boards asking after people's mothers. He asks after Bet Onslow's mother, who has been dead 9 years, and Bet Onslow says thank you, twice, and then he takes the crown's share out of her hand. He asks after Merle Kessel's health with great warmth and then takes the crown's share of the Kessel boats off the boards, and Merle Kessel smiles at him and lets him because she wants him warm for what she is about to do with him. He gets as far as Nettle Onslow, who explains the tide to him. The crown's man on the Asa Delta stands on those boards with a cup in his hand and has the delta tide explained to him at length, with 2 corrections and 1 restart, and he cannot leave because a Kessel is holding his elbow. Then Merle Cassile gets up on the fish crate at the shore end and prices me in front of the whole river, and she does it in the pleasant voice she uses for weighing out a supper. A man was bought for 8 silver off a debt boat by this house, she says. The boat he goes out in is this house's boat. The water past the bar belongs to whoever holds this pier, and I hold it, and everything that comes out of that river comes to my table first. 200 people, a reeve with a cup in his hand, and my mother-in-law saying my price with her chin up. What makes it land is that she is not wrong. She bought me. The skiff is hers. There is not one man tied up along that pier who could stand and say otherwise without lying about how this delta works, and every one of them knows it, and so do I. Speak says that all seems very orderly, and asks after her health again, and holds his cup out for the second cup. I have a sentence ready, and I get no chance to use it, and that is a mercy, because my sentence is about weight, and none of what happens next is about weight at all. Married daughter with a husband is her own house from the day she says so out loud in front of the reeve. Ione says it from the boards, and not from the crate. She has come down the ladder and along 4 decks, and she is standing at the foot of the crate her mother is on with one hand out on a mooring post to know where she is, and she pitches it to carry to the far side of the pier. And I say so, she says, in front of the reeve and in front of all of you, and I would like the day remembered. Then she says the number. She says what the Temple House at Ardenmouth pays a family to take in a girl who cannot work, and she says it twice because she has been at Bet Onslow's scale all week, and she has learned how you make a figure stay in 200 heads. Her mother cannot answer that. She cannot answer it in front of 200 people, because the only answer to it is the letter that came up on the last ice boat, and everybody on that pier can hear the shape of the hole where that answer should be. Earl Kessel stands on a fish crate above her blind daughter, with her mouth open on a sentence she cannot afford, and then she gets down off the crate and sits on it. Bet Onslow says the number a 3rd time from the scale, and nobody asked her to. Sukmarin puts down the pan. Taller taps the rail twice, and there is not one human being on that pier facing his way. Speak asks after Ione's health. She tells him she is very well and asks him to remember the day, and he says he will, and he has already decided he heard nothing that requires him to do anything, and that is his whole trade. Then, a woman I have never spoken to in my life comes and stands beside me on the boards and asks me one question, which is how far down I can get. Vesadrun, 38. Tar and tobacco. A folded chart in her coat that she does not open in company. 20 boats up and down this river, and she works them herself, and she is the best boat handler on the Asa and has never had one night's luck in the deep water. 60 feet, I say. 6 minutes and change. She does not blink, and she says nothing at all, and the silence goes on well past where a person would fill it, and I have to stand there inside it. Then she offers me a partnership. Her hulls, her crews, her ice contracts down at the coast, and my water. She names the split before I can ask for it, and the split is fair. And she waits again. No, I say. That is the whole of my answer. It costs me nothing whatever to say, and it is the most expensive word in my mouth, and nobody standing on those boards can tell, including me. She nods once and goes back to her own deck, and it is only when she is halfway there that I understand I have told the cleverest person on this river exactly how deep I can go, and exactly how long I can stay, for free, in front of witnesses, because she asked me a question, and I am a man who answers questions. Nettle Onslow, who was standing behind me, tells me that 60 feet is not possible. He explains why. He is entirely correct. That evening, with the light going and the pier still full, a downriver boat runs the top of the cut on the ebb with 2 men in her. We all see it. 200 people on those boards with plates in their hands see a sound hull, with a sound man at the tiller go over hole, not roll and not swamp, go over, as if a hand had come up under the bilge and turned her, and the mast comes round and goes flat on the water, and the rest of her keeps going over. What I hear afterwards is not the boat at all. It is the boards. 200 people with plates in their hands and not one of them moving a foot. Two heads come up, they get onto the bar, the only sensible thing in the water there, and they stand on it with the tide filling round their knees, 800 yards from where every boat on the Asa Delta is tied up. Nobody goes. The Kessel hulls do not go. Speak's men do not go. A downriver crew starts casting off and their skipper stops them, and he is not a coward. He has simply lived here longer than I have. I go, and it takes me the length of that pier to get to the skiff, and every one of those 200 faces is turned to watch a bought-in man do it. I take them off the bar one at a time because the skiff will not hold three, and one of them has a broken collarbone. Loman Frey, the one with the hat, will not leave without the hat, and I let him have the hat, and it is the only argument I lose all evening. The hull comes up on the flood the next morning half a mile downriver with a piece out of her side that is not a rock, and is not a bar, and is nothing anybody wants to name. Piet Vane looks at it for a long time from the boards. Went under her and lifted, he says. 4 words, and then his jaw shuts and he puts the pipe back in. At the storeroom door, there is a clerk off the Ardmouth iceboat who cannot stand the smell of the pier and keeps a handkerchief in his fist from one end of it to the other. He has papers about a temple house. Earl Kessel does the arithmetic with him standing in her own doorway. What the fee is, what the passage costs, what it will save a household in a season set as a rate per month as you would cost out a roof. Ione is 15 feet away hanging washing on a line strung between 2 posts with her back to them, and she does not stop, and she does not miss a peg, and she does not turn her head once. The clerk asks when she travels, and Merle Kessel names the feast day. 11 days, she says, the morning after it. The feast day, she says, is the day I am carried down these boards on a chair the way my own mother was carried, with the whole Delta watching, because I have held this house since I was 32, and I will have my hour of it before I die. And the morning after my hour, she says, that girl goes up on the iceboat, and the clerk writes it down with his handkerchief still in his fist. Out on the washing line, Ione puts a peg on a shirt and reaches for the next one, and her hand is perfectly steady, and she knows the number of days better than her mother does. Dab is on the boards at dawn with his bait jar in both arms and his boots together, standing where a man stands when he has decided he has a place in a boat and is waiting to be told so. He has been buying his own bait for 2 days out of the 5 coppers he won on me, which he has not spent on anything else, and he has been at the mooring before me both mornings. Half the pier is on the boards behind him, because the boards are where you stand now in the mornings to see what the bought-in comes back with. I look at the boy and I look at the boards, and then I get into the skiff and cast off and go out alone, and I tell him nothing at all on my way past. The reason is not the weight of a boy in a boat. A boy weighs about as much as 2 days of ice, and I have carried worse than him for less. The reason is that there are 60 people standing on those planks in the gray light, and every one of them has come down to watch the bought-in go out, and I want them watching one man go over the bar, not a man and a boy. One man. That is all of it. It takes about 4 seconds. I do it with my eyes wide open, and there is no instant in it where I do not know exactly what I am choosing and why. The time I am back, the boards are full, and what happens next is the reason this is the worst day I have had in this Delta, and it does not look like that from anywhere on that pier. Then 3 men come down the boards and ask me for a berth, one after another, in front of everybody. Ovinac is first. He has pulled an oar for Tuller Casil for 9 years, and he laughed at me on the first morning, and he stands there with his hat in both hands and says he can hold a line and would sooner hold mine. Roltesk laughed loudest of anybody that morning. He does not pretend otherwise. I was wrong about you on the boards, and I will say so anywhere you like, he says. And I have 4 at home and a boat that leaks. Ebersmall did not laugh, and did not stop anybody laughing, and he says that and then says nothing else, which out of the 3 of them is the one that gets closest to me. And a 4th, a downriver man called Loman Frey, whose collarbone I took off a sandbar 4 nights ago along with his hat, and he offers to come for a share and no wage at all until I say otherwise, and he says it twice because he thinks I have not heard him. Dab is standing 6 feet away with the jar in both arms and his boots still together, and he has not moved them since the light came. I work alone, I say. That is the whole sentence. 4 men at once, and I do not look at the boy while I am saying it, and I know to the inch where he is standing, and I know he can hear every word. Ovinac puts his hat back on. Roltesk says fair enough and means it. Loman Frey asks whether I will want a man in a month, and I tell him no, and he nods, and that is 4 people I have refused in about 11 words on a public pier. The boards applaud me. It is not all of them, and it does not last long, and there is a noise on that pier when the 4 of them step back, and I am halfway up the ladder before it stops, and I am ashamed of myself before my second boot is off the rung. That is the shape of it. I have done the same thing twice in one morning, the second time to grown men in front of a crowd, and the crowd has read it as a man who does not need anybody, and every soul on that pier has decided it is the finest thing they have seen all week. Hall is not worth telling because nobody on those boards is talking about the hall by noon. They are talking about 4 men refused in one sentence, and Bet Onslow says the wait twice to people who do not stop walking for it. Hessapel is on the downriver boat that pays Friday, coiling on the foredeck, and she watches all of it from 30 feet away over the top of her own work. You had 4, she says, when I go past. 3 of them any skipper on this river would take, and 1 of them owes you his neck, and you have got a hull that leaks and 1 pair of hands. I work alone, I say. You work alone until the day the water decides otherwise, she says, and then you find out what you have got, and she goes back to her coil and does not look up again. I get out of the day comes up on the side of my neck that evening, where a collar does not cover it. Ione finds it with her fingers before I know it is there, going past me at the door, and she stops with 2 fingers flat on it and says that this one is not on my arm. No, I say. Then everybody will see that one, she says, and goes on into the house. And that is not a warning, and it is not comfort, and I do not know what to do with it. Onslow explains to me that afternoon, thoroughly and from the very top, why a boy in a boat is a hazard, and he does it standing between me and my own mooring. He covers weight in the wrong place. He covers a child's hands on a line under load. He covers what happens when a boy who cannot swim goes over the side of a hull that is already fighting something, and he is right about every single word of it. Being agreed with by Onslow is the worst thing that happens to me all week, and it takes him 9 minutes to do it, and his mother comes past halfway through and does not save me. I do not tell him he has the wrong reason. I stand there and let a man who explains tides to fishermen hand me a decent excuse, out loud, in public, for free. And Sook Marin charges me 3 coppers for a 2-copper bowl and takes the third with 2 fingers. And she does not say anything about the boy either, and Sook Marin says something about everything. Ione spends that day being her own house for the first time in her life, and she spends all of it at the scale, because the scale is the only place on this pier where she already knows everything. She tells Bet Onslow to weigh what I bring in and to hold it under her own name, not the Kessel name, and Bet Onslow writes Ione Kessel on the slate and says it twice while she writes it. Then she trades Sook Marin oil against fish at a rate she has worked out on the beam herself. And it is the first bargain anybody in that family has made without a Kessel standing over it. Sook tries her at the wrong rate once, on purpose, as you test any new hand. 4 pounds the pint, she says. 3 1/4, says Ione, and you had it off the ice boat at 3, and I would rather you had the quarter than the carter. Sook Marin looks at her for a while and takes 3 1/4 and says the girl is her mother's daughter, which she means as a compliment, and which lands on both of them like a dropped crate. The evening, the house's portion comes out of the catch before Merle sees any of it, and it comes out at the weight her daughter says. At the table, Merle puts her hand out for Bet Onslow's slate, which has come up in Ione's hands, and she puts it out as she has put it out in that room for 30 years. That is the pier's slate, says Ione. It has my name on it. Bet wrote it and said it twice, and half the town heard her say it twice, and if you want the figures, I will read you the figures. Read them out then, says her mother, and sits down at her own table, and does not take her hand back off it. So, Ione reads them from memory, in order, weights and rates and what the house takes, and she does not miss one figure of it, and she finishes by naming what is left over and what she intends to do with it. Merle Kessel listens to all of it with her hand still held out across the table. Then she takes the hand back and weighs her own supper on her own little scale and finds it exact to the 1/4 ounce. 9 days to the feast day. Ione knots the 7th tooth, and then the 8th, and then the 9th, and she counts the whole line from the beginning every time she adds 1 with her fingers in the dark out loud. Dab takes a berth with Sabe Casil that afternoon, and I hear about it from Sook Marin, who tells me while she is scraping her pan, and does not stop scraping. Sabe buys the boy a fried bowl to seal it, which costs him 2 coppers he has not got, and he stands there while Dab eats it, and he tells him he has hands on him and can hold a line, and he means it. And he means it, which is the thing about Sabe Kessel nobody in this delta bothers to find out. He repeats the last 3 words of everything anybody says to him because he is checking he has understood it, and he has been decent to that boy on those pilings for 2 years while the rest of us walked past. At the door that night, Ione asked me where Dab was this morning, and she asks it the way she asks everything, once flatly, while her hands go on doing something else. Boy in a boat is a hazard, I say. Weight in the wrong place, and a child's hands on a line under load. I use Nettle Onslow's words, which are all true, and I use them in Nettle Onslow's order. She does not say anything at all. She does not argue. She does not ask a second question. She does not tell me I am lying. She stands there with the drying cloth in her hands and lets all of it go by, and then she asks whether I want the lamp lit. And that is how I find out she heard the other reason, and she never says a word of it. She is a woman who asks one question about everything, all day, every day, and she did not ask a second one about this. I sit out on the boards until the tide is right out and the mud is making its noises under the piles, and I do not go back in, and I do not light the lamp. At the mouth of the cut, at dusk, Sabe, Kessel, and Dab are baiting a long line off the stern of a boat that is not Sabe's. Boy baits fast and clean and puts the hooks down in the tray in 4 so they do not foul each other, and Sabe watches him do it and tells him that is right, and Dab counts the tray out loud and says 12 when it is 14. 14, says Sabe. 14, says Dab, and goes back to baiting, and neither of them makes anything of it, and that is more than anybody else on that pier has managed. Sabe Kessel sits down on the thwart and tells the boy what he wants, which is his own name burnt into a transom. Not the family's name. His own. Sabe, cut into the wood at the stern of a hull nobody else has any claim on, so that when it comes up, the river people say whose boat that is and get told. He says he has wanted it since he was 15. He says his brother will have the house, and his mother will have the pier, and there is nothing left in the Casil family for a second son except what he goes and takes out of the water himself. Dab says he will burn it in. He says he can do letters, and he can, and Sabe Kessel looks at him for a while and then says he will hold him to that. And the boy asks him a question, and it is the only thing he wants out of any of this. When it comes up the river, he says, and people ask whose boat that is, will you be the one that gets sent for, or will it be me that goes and tells them? You, says Sabe. Nobody has ever sent Dab anywhere in his life. He sits on that thwart with the tray in his lap and says nothing else for a while, and he baits the rest of the line so clean you could sell it. Then he tells the boy to be at the mooring an hour before the light, because tomorrow they are not running the long line at the cut's mouth, they are running it in the cut proper, on the top of the tide, where nobody sets a line at all. Nobody has told either of them what goes up and down that channel at the top of the tide with a wake the length of a town behind it. One man on that pier has seen it, and he is sitting down by the stall with a pipe, and nobody has asked him anything. Boy says an hour before the light, and picks up his jar, and goes home along the pilings the fast way in the dark, over water, as he has gone home every night of his life. 5 days out from the feast, there are marks up the inside of both my forearms and one at the side of my neck, and the pier has stopped pretending it cannot see them. They come up the same way every time. Dark, warm, slow, a tide line under the skin, and by the next morning they have gone the color of wet rope and they do not fade. I have counted 5. Ione has counted 5, with her fingers on my arm in the dark at the same time she counts the teeth. Pilewater has counted more than 5, because Pilewater does its counting through a shirt at 40 feet and has never once let that slow it down. The theories arrive in order of increasing confidence and decreasing sense, and they arrive at Sukmarin's counter because that is where a thing has to be said before it is true. River in him. That is the first one, and it is a week old already. Then it is river coming up in him, because he has taken too much out and the cut is taking it back in the only currency it has. Then it is not the cut, it is grandmother, and she has marked him the way a carter marks a barrel he intends to come back for. Then a reed cutter says the marks are on the inside and are coming out, which means he was that before he came, which means the debt boat did not sell the Kessels a husband at all. Onslow explains to that man, thoroughly, from the beginning, why what he has just said cannot be right, and gets far enough into it that the man has time to improve it, and he improves it by saying the marks are gills. By the third day, it is gills. 6 people in that stall will tell you it is gills, and 2 of them have seen them open. I have never heard anything as confidently wrong as a Delta man with a bowl in his hand, and I have worked crab boats out of a northern harbor with men who believed a woman on the dock could turn the wind. Then Sukmarin puts my bowl down on the counter and steps back away from it. She does not push it across at me. She puts it down, takes her hands off it, and steps back, and when I lay 3 coppers on the wood, she does not pick them up. I do not want your money today, she says. You have taken it every day for a month, I say. At 3 for a 2-copper bowl, and I have not once complained about the stall boy. She wipes her hands on her apron and looks at the counter between us, and I have not seen her do that to any living soul. It is not you, Cal, she says. And then she does not finish it, because there is no end to that sentence that is not a lie. Say the rest of it, I say. There is a man in my stall who will not eat off a plate you have handled, she says. There are 2 more who will not stand where you stand, and I have 1 pan and 1 counter, and I feed this whole pier off both of them. So it is money, I say. It is my whole living, she says, and takes a rag to the wood in front of her, and starts on the next order without another word. And I have never wanted so much for somebody to be lying to me. Sukmarin is the kindest person on that pier. She has fed a bait boy off her own scraps for 2 years without either of them mentioning it once. She is the first one to do a cold thing to me, and she does it with her hands off the bowl, and it is worse than everything the Kessels have managed to put together. I take the bowl. I eat it standing up at the end of her counter, and I leave the 3 coppers on the wood, and she does not touch them, and they are still sitting there in the evening when the light goes. That is the same afternoon I bring in a thing too big to get off the boards on my own, which on any other day of the last month would have been the best half hour of my week. 3 men come down to shift it, because that is what happens on that pier when there is a weight on the planks, and it is nobody's favor and nobody's kindness. It is just what the boards do. 2 of them will not put a hand on my line. They come down, they look at the fish, and then they look at the hemp in my fist and at what is going up my forearm out of the rolled sleeve, and Iber Small says he has a bad back, and Roltesk does not say anything at all. Ovi Knack holds the line. He is the man who ate the first free bowl in front of his own employer, and he is not about to start now, but 1 pair of hands, and mine is not 3 pairs of hands. So I take it off the boards alone. It goes badly, and it takes a long time, and I put a shoulder into a bollard doing it, and there are 80 people watching, and somewhere behind me, a voice says the word gills. Bet Onslow weighs it and says 420, twice, in her ordinary voice at her ordinary volume, as if there were nothing at all happening on her own boards. And she says something nobody has asked her for. There are 12 teeth on the girl's line over that door, she says. 12 teeth. I counted them off the slate myself. That is nobody's business whatsoever. It is not a weight, and it is not a rate, and it has no place at a public scale. And Bet Onslow says it twice at the top of her voice, into a crowd that has just watched two men refuse to touch my rope. 12 mouths a day, she says, and none of them are mine, and I would like that said on these boards, as well as the other thing. It is the kindest act anybody performs in Pilewater that week, and it is done by a woman who has never once been asked her opinion about anything. Ione comes down the ladder while the crowd is still there, and she comes along the boards to the scale with her hand out for the post, and she puts her hand flat on the mark at the side of my neck. She does not stop first. She has no reason to stop because she has never seen a single one of them, and to her hand, it is skin that is a shade warmer than the rest of me. 80 people watch a blind girl put her palm flat on the thing they will not go near with a rope and leave it there. Warmer than the rest of you, Cal, she says. Is it a big one? Neck to collar, I say. Then the good part goes to the widows tonight, and you eat at the table, she says. And I want you sitting down when you do it, and I do not care who is watching. I tell her the widows have had it 3 nights running. Then they will have it 4, she says, and takes her hand off my neck and goes back up the boards, and Bet Onslow watches all of that and says nothing twice. Then, a plank goes near Sook Marin's fire. It is an old one at the shore end of the boards, in the shallow, and it goes under my boot as I come past Piet Vein, and I drop straight through it into the slack, knee-deep and chest-deep where I land, because there is a scour hole under it, and I am standing in the inside water that children fish with a bent pin and a string, and there is nothing at all to hold. I am out of that hole faster than any man has ever come out of the slack. I do not remember the middle of it. I go up the broken plank and along the boards on my hands, and I am 11 feet from the water before I stop, and I am not breathing right, and my hands have gone stupid. 60 seconds before that, the same body was walking 420 pounds up a ladder in front of 80 people. Nobody laughs at first, because for 2 heartbeats, they think I am hurt. Then Roll-Tesk starts, and it goes down the boards from him, and the whole town end has the finest afternoon it has had in years, watching the man who stays under 6 minutes come out of knee-deep water like a cat off a hot stove. I let them have it. I sit on the boards and get my hands back and let 80 people laugh at me, because every second they spend laughing is a second nobody spends thinking about it. Nettle Onslow does not laugh. Nettle Onslow stands there with his head on one side and works forward from 6 minutes under the bar to a man on his hands and knees 11 feet from a puddle and gets close enough that I can watch him do it. Depth is a job, he says slowly. He has that. Then he says a job has a line in it, and a line has an end that is made fast, and then he stops, and I watch him get to the edge of the only true thing anybody has thought about me in a month. Then he says the marks must make him heavy, and he explains why for 4 minutes, and I have never been so glad to hear a man be wrong. Yet Vane has watched all of it from 6 feet away with his pipe going. He says one thing, to the water rather than to me, which is that the 4 of them in the cut could none of them swim either, and that it made no difference to any of them at all. He starts the next sentence, and it goes 8 words and stops, and I go up the boards with my boots in my hand and do not ask him what the rest of it was. At the table that night, Merle Kessel uses every piece of it, and she does not raise her voice once. The feast day is in 4 days, she says. On the feast day, this house is carried down those boards with the whole Delta watching, and a Kessel daughter is stood up beside her husband, and the husband is looked at. She puts a bowl into Ione's hands while she is saying it, so that her daughter has something in her hands and cannot put it down without making a point of putting it down. I am not standing a man with river marks on his neck up where 200 people can look at him as this family's son, she says. They can see it from the shore. They are saying gills at the fry stall. Whatever it is that is happening to him, it is not happening to this house on my hour. Ione holds the bowl the entire time and does not set it down anywhere. Whose hour is it, she says. Mine, says her mother, and there is nothing wrong with that answer at all, and it is the first time in 6 weeks I have heard Merle Kessel say a true thing without arranging it first. Down at the stall, later, Sook Marin asks Dab a question while she is scraping the pan, and Dab is the only person in Pilewater who watches me every single morning of his life. Did the marks come before the fish, she says, or after them? After, says Dab. Every one of them after, and not after the killing either, after the eating, because the first one came up when he put the plate in front of her, and I was on the ladder and I saw his arm. Sook Marin stops scraping. She looks at a boy who has been getting his count wrong out loud on that pier since he could talk, and who has just told her the truth about the strangest thing in this delta in 2 sentences, in order and without a mistake in it. Then she gives him a bowl, and does not charge him for it, and neither of them mentions that either, because they have not mentioned it in 2 years, and there is no reason to start tonight. The ice boat comes up from Ardenmouth the morning after the feast, with a man aboard it who is coming to collect a girl. 4 days. I go up the ladder that night and count the tide out of habit, and Ione counts the teeth, and neither of us says anything about the feast. And Dab does not come home. His jar is on the pilings where he leaves it, and the string on it is dry, and Sook Marin comes up the boards at midnight to ask if anybody has seen him, and the tide is at the top, and the wind is coming round into the north. Long line goes down inside the cut proper at the top of the tide, which nobody on the Asa has done in 60 years, and somewhere in the dark it comes alive under the bow. Dab is in the bow with the tray. He has 14 hooks baited and 4 of them in his hands, and when the line goes, it takes the tray and the hooks and the boy off the foredeck in one movement, and he is gone before Sabe Kessel has his head round. Sabe goes in after him. He goes over the side into the cut at night with a lamp still burning on the thwart, and he gets a fist into the boy's shirt, and he gets the 2 of them back onto the counter of the boat by way of the anchor warp. Nobody in this delta ever takes that off Sabe Kessel. Not me, not his mother, not the town. Whatever else he is, he went into that water in the dark for a bait boy who was not his, and I have not done one thing in my life that cost more than that. By the time I get down the boards, Sook Marin has the boy on her counter, with her pan pushed off the fire, and her own apron rolled under his head, and she is running the town end like a field hospital. She has 3 men holding lamps and 1 holding a kettle, and she has sent a 4th for the bone setter, and she is charging every one of them for their bowls while they do it, and taking the coppers with 2 fingers. Somebody is going to eat this fish anyway, she says, when Roltesk objects to being charged. 2 coppers. Hold the lamp higher. Nettle Onslow arrives and explains to her how a lamp ought to be held over a man with water in him, and she says yes, and takes the lamp off him and gives it to somebody else, and he starts again from the beginning. The boy has river in him. He brings a good deal of it up while I am standing there, and he does it quietly, which frightens me more than the other way round would. Then he sees me. He turns his head on Sook Marin's apron, and his eyes come round, and an 11-year-old with a chest full of the ossa in him says he is sorry. Ask him what he is sorry for. For the tray, he says. 14 hooks and the tray, and it was in my hands, and I let it go. I tell him a tray costs 9 coppers. He says it was Sabe's tray. I tell him it will be Sabe's 9 coppers then, and the boy shuts his eyes, and Sook Marin looks at me across the counter over the top of his head with a face I have not seen on her before. Then Dab says the other thing, and he says it with his eyes still shut. I would have been in your boat, he says. If I had been in your boat, I would have been on the line and not on the tray. There is no answer to that anywhere in the world. I stand at that counter and hold a lamp for a boy who is apologizing to me for being dragged off somebody else's bow because I would not have him in mine, and the only sound anywhere near us is Sook Marin's kettle. He will not get into a hull after that. Not that night, and not the next day, and not for a long time, and it is not a thing anybody argues with him about, because he does not argue, he simply is not in the boat. Pier holds me responsible. Not out loud, not all of them, and not in a way I could stand up and answer. It gets done the way a pier does it, which is by the volume of talk dropping about 6 inches when I walk down the boards and coming back up behind me. Ebersmall says, to a man beside him, loud enough to carry, that if you tell a boy on Monday he is not fit for your boat, he will go and be fit for somebody's by Wednesday. That is unfair, and it is exactly correct at the same time, and I have to stand on the same 40 feet of plank as both of those things all morning. Ione does not defend me. Not to Sook, not to Bet Onslow, not to her mother, and not to me. She goes down to that counter 3 times in the day and sits with the boy, and she takes his count off him and gives it back to him right. And she says nothing about me to anybody. She has never once lied on my behalf in 6 weeks, and she is not going to start with a child laid out on a counter. What she does at that counter is arithmetic. How many hooks were in the tray? She asks him. 12, says Dab. 14, she says. He says 14 and looks at her, and she tells him that she can count and he can count, and there are 2 of them on this pier who can, and he had better keep it up. Then she asks him how many teeth are on the line over her door, and he says 19, and she says 12, and the boy laughs at that with River still in him, and it is the first thing to happen at the town end all night that anybody wanted. Bonesetter charges by the joint, and nothing in the boy is broken, so he charges for looking, and Sook pays him out of the pot and puts it on the slate against my name without asking me, and it is the first money she has taken off me in 4 days. By noon, there is a weight on Bet Onslow's scale that is not mine, and Sabe Kessel is standing beside it, and he has come up the boards with a bad night still on him and 40 pounds of common river fish to sell. He wants Bet to weigh it at the good rate. It is bar stuff, and it goes at 4 coppers, and he says the number he wants for it, and she says the number twice, and the numbers are not the same. And I get into it. There is no reason on this river for me to be within 20 feet of that scale, and I get into it anyway. Say the rate again, I say to Bet Onslow, and she says it twice. What has 100 weight of bar stuff ever paid on this pier, I say, and she says 4 coppers, 4 coppers. And I turn round to a man who has been in that water in the dark and tell him he is standing at a public scale asking a woman to say a number that is not true. He says that is not true. 3 words, and they are mine, and he has nowhere at all to put them, and Toller Casil is standing 12 feet away with a rope in his hands and does not say 1 word for his own brother. A Kessel has been pricing people on this pier since before I got here, I say, and I did not expect to watch one try it on a scale in front of Bet Onslow, over 40 pounds of barfish at 4 coppers. He says at 4 coppers, and that is his entire answer to any of it, and then the boards go up in a laugh. 80 men laugh at once, and it is a good laugh, and it goes up and out over the water and comes back off the far side, and I stand in the middle of it, and I feel it go straight down into me like warm drink. That is the moment. That is exactly the moment, and I hear how it sounds about 1 second later than everybody else does. He did not put that boy in the bow to be cruel. He put him there because the boy has hands, and he told him so, and he bought him a fried bowl to seal it. And then he went in after him in the dark, and he is standing at this scale with River still in his boots, trying to get 7 coppers over the rate for 40 pounds of barfish, and the reason he wants them is that he has no hull of his own to be worth anything in. He does not have another sentence. He looks for one for a while. He says over 40 pounds, and then he says the 4 coppers again, and then he picks his fish up off the plate and carries it away down the boards past every man who laughed, and his walk is wrong every step of it. Bet Onslow does not say a word to me. She writes the weight on her own slate, and she says the wrong number, twice, deliberately, in her own voice, at her ordinary volume, and then she looks up at me and corrects it herself. 4 coppers, she says. 4 coppers. There. That is how a rate gets set on this pier when there is nobody standing over it, and I have been on these boards 6 weeks and I have never once seen her do that. Go looking for him in the afternoon, and I do not find him. He is not at the moorings, and he is not at the stall, and he is not in the house, and I ask nobody where he is, because asking is the one thing I do not do. Down at the shore end, Piet Vane says something at the water while I am counting my own haul into the tray. The wind has been in the north 3 days, he says. When it goes round and stays round, the cut turns over on itself, and everything in it comes up, and what lies at the bottom of it comes up too. That is what happened the year He stops. He always stops. I have my hand on a fish and my mouth on a number, and I do not turn round, and I do not ask him what happened the year they went in, and he sits there with the pipe in his teeth and lets me not ask. 3 days to the feast day. At her own table that night, Merla Kessil watches her second son come in with wet boots and no money and sits him down and gives him his supper, Wade, and then she tells him what his father would have said. She does it quietly. She does not shout, she does not strike him, she does not throw him out. She tells him, in about 4 sentences, what the man whose name is on this house would have said about a Kessel who let a bought-in husband correct him at a public scale in front of the whole pier. Then she says it would all have been said in front of everybody because his father never saved anything up. And then she gives him more supper. I am not in the room. I am out on the boards with a coil in my hands, and I hear the pans and the voices and nothing of the words, and I will never know what was said at that table, and neither will anybody else. That is the blow that finishes Sabe Kessel, and I did not throw it, and I built the afternoon that made it possible. After dark, at the far moorings, Sabe Kessel unties a boat that is not his, and he does it without a lamp lit. He takes his time over the knots. He coils what he unties instead of dropping it, which is what a good hand does when he has stopped thinking about his hands. He puts a lamp in the boat and does not light it, and a hook, and a tray, and no bait at all. Inside the house, on the other side of a wall, Ione is at the top of the stairs with her hand flat on the frame. That is Sabe on the boards, she says out loud, into a dark house. He is going down to the moorings, and he is carrying something, and he is on his own. Nobody in that house gets up. Her mother does not get up. Her brother does not get up. She says it a second time, louder, and puts her hand out along the wall, and the boards outside go quiet, and the water takes whatever weight has just gone onto it. At dawn, the mooring is empty, and there is a line coiled neatly on the boards beside it, where nobody ever coils one, and Sabe Kessel is not in the house. The boat comes up on a bar at first light with the bow out of the water and a hole in her side that is not a rock, and it is a hole about the width of a door. Toller finds her. He goes down the boards to tell his mother, and he does not tell anybody else. And by the time the boards are full, it does not matter, because 40 people can see a Kessel hull sitting on a sandbar at the mouth of the cut with nobody in her. Nobody will go in. Toller Kessel will not go in, and he says so, and he is not a coward. He has a wife and 2 children, and he has spent 31 years being told what that channel does, and he stands there working a rope through his fingers and says the word no about 4 times in different arrangements. The Reeves 2 men will not go in, and they do not pretend to consider it. Vesadrune's people are 14 miles downriver on the ebb and will not be up before dark, and everybody on the board says her name at least once, and I notice that and do not understand it yet. Loman Frey offers. He has 1 arm in a sling from a bar I took him off, and he offers, and I tell him no, and it is the only refusal I make that day I would make again. Then Merle Kessel comes down the ladder. She comes down onto the boards with her hair done and her apron on in front of the whole pier, and she stands in front of me, and she does the only thing left in her hands, and she does it as a purchase. 12 silver, she says, and I do not answer her because I am busy trying to hear it properly. 12 silver to go in after him, she says. That is half again what this house paid for you, and it is every coin in that house, and I will put it on the boards in front of these people now if you want it counted. 200 faces. A woman of 60 pricing a rescue of her own son at a public scale, out loud, because pricing is the only language she has ever been given, and she is using it to beg. And the terrible thing, the thing I take out into that water with me, is that she is not doing it to insult me. She is doing it because she believes, entirely honestly, that a man who was bought will go for money and will not go for anything else, and I have given her no evidence against it in 6 weeks. Keep it, I say. Have the kettle on. Then I get the good line, the 15 copper one, and the hook. And Ovinak pulls me out to the mouth of the cut in his own boat and does not say one word all the way out. And behind us, the boards are so quiet I can hear Suk Marin's pan. The cut is 60 feet of brown at high water and 300 yards across, with 100 miles of delta emptying through it twice a day. It is not deep because the river is deep. It is deep because something scoured it out and has gone on scouring it. I take 3 wraps of the line round my fist and go down the anchor warp, and Ovinak puts his boot on the warp and says nothing at all. At 20 feet, the light goes the color of tea. At 40, it goes out. And at about 45, my eyes stop trying to be eyes and start being something else, and the brown comes back as shapes with edges on them. And that is when I understand what has been happening to me for 6 weeks. It was never gills, and it was never river coming up in me. Somebody has been building a diver out of a crabman, 1 meal at a time, paying for it in mouths, and I have been wearing the receipts on my own arms all month and letting the pier read them wrong. I get to the bottom of the warp, and the bottom is not there, so I let go of it and go down the last of it on nothing, and I have not been that frightened since the plank went. 60 feet. Sand, ridged, hard-packed, going away into the dark on both sides like a road nobody uses. Cold in bands, a current down there running the other way from the current on top, and I would not have believed that off any man's word. I price it out loud on the way down, because that is what my mouth does. 12 silver for a night's work, 1 hull, 1 hook, and a man. 9 coppers, 100 weight on the common stuff. So a kessel, dead or alive, comes in at about 3,200 weight of barfish, and that is wrong. And I know it is wrong before I have finished thinking it, and it is the first sum I have got wrong in this delta. He is not worth 3,200 weight of anything, and neither am I, and the arithmetic does not go there, and I have been using it to keep from thinking about the hole in the boat. I come up at 4 minutes and the whole pier is already counting, in doubles, because Bet Onslow is counting, and Bet Onslow cannot say a number once. 4, 4, 5, 5. Ovi has the boat over the top of me. I take 2 lungfuls and go back down, and on the second descent I work east along the bottom where the tide would have carried a man, and I stay down longer than I have ever stayed down under anything in my life. 6, 6, 7, 7. 8. 8. Ovinak tells me afterwards that at 8 the counting went quiet at both ends of the pier and only Bet kept on. Down where the bait boys tie, with the counting going on over the water behind her, Vesadrun sits down on the boards next to Piet Vane. She does not tell him anything. She asks him what happens to a man who goes down into that water, and then she stops talking. Piet Vane starts the sentence he has not finished in 11 years, and this time somebody is still sitting there when he gets to the middle of it. It comes out slowly, and it comes out badly, and twice he goes back to the beginning, and she sits through all of it with her hands on her knees. She asks him 3 more things: what the water does when the wind holds in the north, what he saw, what the 4 of them were doing at the time. He answers all 3. It takes a quarter of an hour, and he is crying by the end of it, quietly, without stopping talking, and Vesadrun does not touch him, and does not comfort him, and does not once look away. Then she takes out 4 silver and puts it into his hand, and closes his fingers round it, and thanks him, and gets up, and she writes not one word of it down anywhere. 9. 9. On the third descent, going east along the bottom in the dark with the shapes coming back at me with their edges on, I go over something. It is lying along the sand with the current going over it, and it is not sand, and it is not a bar, and it is not a wreck. I go over the length of it about 6 feet up, and I keep going, and I do not touch it, and I do not stop. It is longer than Bet Onslow's scale. It is longer than the Freistall and the scale put together. It is about the length of that pier, and it does not move at all while I am over it, and I put my eyes forward and my hands on the line and go on east. I do not name it. Not down there, and not on the way up, and not to one living soul on those boards afterwards. Some things you do not say out loud in the water. I find him on the far bar with his chest and one arm out, and the rest of him in, hooked over the shoulder of a sand ridge, and the tide has been going in and out of him most of the night. He is alive. He is gray and cold through, and there is nothing at all left in him. And when I get a hand under his arm, he says into the sand the last 3 words anybody said to him, which he has been holding on to all night, and they are mine, and they are hold on. I get him into the boat by the trick you use for a man with nothing left, which is to put him over the gunwale in the middle and roll him rather than lift him. And Ovinak takes his belt, and I take his legs, and we roll a kessel into a kessel boat like a wet sack. Then I stand up in that boat and bring him up the cut on the flood with the oar under my arm, standing all the way up the middle of the channel, because there is not one soul on that pier who is going to see this sitting down. And the whole town is on the boards. 240 people, both sides of the pier, out along the boards and up on the roofs of the stilt houses, and the noise they make when they see that he is moving is the loudest thing I have ever heard on fresh water. Bet Onslow says it from the scale, and she says it twice, as she says every single thing. The cut belongs to whoever can go into it, she says. The cut belongs to whoever can go into it. She has said that sentence her whole life as a joke, as this whole delta has. The way you say it about a lost shoe or a wet summer. She starts the second one as a joke too, because she has started it as a joke every time since she was a girl. Then somewhere in the middle of it, her voice changes, and 240 people hear it change, and the end of it comes out as a plain flat description of a man standing up in a boat. That is the moment the joke stops being a joke, and it does not happen in the cut. It happens at a public scale, in a woman's mouth, halfway through the second time. Toller Kessel thanks me. He does it in front of Bet and Sook and Ovinak and about 100 others, and he does it badly. He taps the rail twice first, out of habit, and then he says, "Thank you for my brother," and then he cannot find a second sentence, and he stands there in front of all of them with a rope in his hands and nothing to do with his face. That costs him more than the 8 silver did. He handed over the 8 silver like a man buying a hull. He hands over the thank you like a man having a tooth out. Erla Casile has the kettle on. She does not say 12 silver again, and she does not put it on the boards, and neither of us mentions it again. And everybody on that pier heard her say it. Sabe comes back into himself around noon. He is wrapped in 4 coats on Sook Marin's counter, with a bowl he cannot hold, and Sook has already started charging spectators. Nettle Onslow explains drowning to me, thoroughly, from the beginning. To the man who has just come up out of 60 feet of the Ossa with a kessel under his arm, Nettle Onslow explains what water does inside a man, and he gets one detail wrong, and I let him have that as well. Then the reed cutter who is missing a shoe says a prayer over Sabe, out loud, badly remembered, and gets to the part about the deep and the ones who are held in it. Held in it, says Sabe Kessel out of the middle of 4 coats in his ordinary voice, at the exact worst moment available to him. And every soul on that pier laughs at once on boards, where 2 hours ago nobody was making any sound at all, and Sabe blinks at all of them and has no idea what he has done, and Sook Marin has to sit down on her own crate. That evening Ione comes out onto the walkway and finds me, and there is nobody else out there at all, and she says one sentence to me. "You did that," she says. She does not say which. She does not have to say which, and she does not soften it, and she does not take it back, and she stands there long enough for me to have both halves of it. Then she goes in and gets the line down off the nails, and she knots a tooth onto it, and there is no fish today, and nothing came out of that water except a man. 15. She says, and counts the whole line from the beginning with her fingers, out loud, in the dark, the way she has counted it every night since the first one. And nothing at all comes up under my skin, that day or that night. I have been down in that channel 3 times and brought a man up out of it, and the river does not pay me 1 copper for any of it. Nobody ate anything. That is all it is, and I lie on that reed mat in the dark and work out exactly what it means about the thing that has been happening to me for 6 weeks. In the morning, Reeve Halloran Speak rides in from downriver with 2 men behind him, 4 days early, because a man who can put himself on the bottom of the cut and come back has just changed what the Crown's deep water is worth. He comes down the boards with his seal ring turning on his finger, and he stops in front of Merle Kessel, and he asks very warmly indeed after her health. Somewhere in the 2 days after the cut, the pier starts using my name, and I cannot work out when it started or who did it first. It is not announced. Nobody comes and tells me. I go down the boards on the morning after the rescue, and a man I have never spoken to moves a crate out of my way and says, "Morning, Cal," and goes on scrubbing his deck. Noon, it is everywhere. "Cal," says Bet Onslow off the scale, and then says it again. Cal, because she has never in her life said anything once. Sook Marin puts a bowl down and says it. Raltesk says it. Ovinak has been saying it for a fortnight, and I only notice now that everybody else has caught him up. I have been the bought-in for 6 weeks. I have been Kessel's man, and the one with the marks and gills, and a thing the reed cutters have a word for that I am not going to repeat. Nobody in this delta has said my name to my face except a blind girl and a stall woman I overpaid, and now 200 people are saying it as though it has always been there on the boards with the rest of the fittings. It goes into me deeper than any of the rest of it. I would not have believed that. A man can be called a monster for a month and shrug it off, and then somebody says good morning to him with his own name in it, and he has to stand still for a moment and look at a rope. Reeve Halloran Speak asks after my health for 4 days running. He asks after it at the scale, on the boards, at Sook Marin's counter, and twice in the Kessel kitchen, and each time he asks, he takes something away with him, and none of what he takes is fish. What he wants is a quiet river, and that is his whole trade. A reeve on the Ossa, with a season behind him that has no drownings in it and no boats lost, gets read in Ardenmouth as a man who has settled a difficult district. And a man who has settled a difficult district gets a posting away from water entirely. He wants a desk. He has wanted one for 9 years, and he has spent those 9 years standing on wet planks asking after the health of people whose sons the river has taken. So I give him the river. I tell him what the cut does at the top of the tide and what it does when the wind holds in the north. I tell him where the bars have moved this season and which of them will move again. Then I tell him that a hull going through the top of that channel on the ebb is a hull that will be sitting on a bar by morning, and that if his men say so at every mooring between here and the coast, he will have a whole season with nobody drowned in it. He writes all of it down in a little book, slowly, with his seal ring turning on his finger, and then he asks whether he may put it forward as the Reeve's own survey of the deep channel. I tell him he may, and he does, and it goes down to Ardenmouth in his own hand with his own seal on it. And it is the single most useful thing anybody does for me in that whole season, and I did not do one clever thing to arrange it. He came up that river to squeeze a bought-in husband, and he went away carrying the man's work as his own achievement, and he is grateful, and he says so, warmly, and asks after Merle Kessel's health as he goes. Then I buy a boat, 9 silver and 4 coppers, off a downriver widow whose husband built her and never finished her, 22 feet of delta hull with a flat run aft and no sprung plank anywhere in her. I say the price out loud at the scale because I say every price out loud. Bet Onslow says 9 silver and 4 twice, and then says it is 9 silver and 4 too much for a hull with no name on the transom, and I tell her the transom can wait. Feast day comes up out of the delta like weather. It is not a market, and it is not the water day. It is the day Pilewater carries whoever holds the pier down the length of the boards on a chair once a year, with 100 miles of river tied up along both sides to watch it happen, and it has been done that way since before anybody's grandmother. Merle Kessel has wanted this since she was 32 years old. Her own mother was carried down those boards in a chair with a cushion on it, and Merle walked behind holding a bowl, and she has had that hour in her head for 28 years. And she gets it. Every minute of that hour, and nobody on those boards takes 1 second of it off her, and I would like that said first and said plainly. 6 men carry the chair. Ovinac is at the front left. Roltesk and Ibersmall have the back poles. Loman Frey, one arm still bad, has a hand on the rail beside her for the corner where the boards bend. Every one of those men eats at my table. Not one of them mentions it, and neither do I. And Merle Kessel sits up in that chair with her hair done and her hands in her lap and takes the length of the pier at walking pace with 240 people clapping. She is magnificent. That is the honest word for it. A woman of 60 who has weighed her family's suppers on a hand scale for 30 years, being carried past every person who has ever watched her do it, with her chin up, absolutely certain that this is owed to her. And it is funny. And it is funny because she is playing it entirely straight. She nods at people. She nods at Bet Onslow, who says congratulations twice. She nods at Piet Vane, who does not look up. She has her mother's cushion under her, and she has had it aired. At the shore end, where the chair is set down, Ione is waiting with Bet Onslow on one side of her and Sook Marin's fire going behind her, and she names the price of the hour out loud, on those planks, in front of every one of them. 2 things, she says. The keys of that house, into my hands, on these boards, now, and the letter from the temple house at Ardenmouth into Sook Marin's fire, in front of everybody, with all of us watching it go. Boards go quiet in about a second and a half. Everybody who has spent the last hour clapping stand there holding plates. Merle Kessel looks at her daughter for a long time. She is still in the chair. She has had 55 minutes of the hour she has wanted since she was 32, and there are 5 minutes left in it, and everybody on that pier is now waiting to see what those 5 minutes cost. You have not asked me for anything, she says. You have told me the price. Yes, says Ione. That is how it is done in this family. I learned it at your table, and I have got the arithmetic off you as well, and I have not put a copper on it that was not already there. Then Merle Kessel takes the keys off her own belt in front of 240 people and puts them into her daughter's hands. She does not throw them, and she does not drop them. She puts them in her hands and closes the fingers over them as you do with a child. She gets the letter out of her apron. It has been in her apron all morning. It went into that apron before the chair came out, which means she knew, which means she has known since the water day exactly how this hour was going to end, and she wanted the hour anyway. Sook Marin holds the pan out. The letter goes into the fire under it, and Sook does not say a word, and the town end watches a piece of paper go up in a fry stall on a feast day. Merle Kessel enjoys none of it. She sits in that chair with her hands empty and her chin still up, and she has her cushion and her 5 minutes, and she does not cry and she does not shout. Toller Kessel stands on the boards 11 feet away and watches his mother put the keys of that house into his blind sister's hands. 31 years old. He has been reaching for those since he was 19. He has done everything that family has ever asked of him. He runs its boats, he made its money, and he stands on a public pier in front of the delta with a coil of rope in his fists while a woman who cannot see the keys is given them. He knocks the rail twice. Nobody waits for the sentence. There is nobody on those boards facing him at all, and the tapping goes off into the noise of the crowd like a bird nobody looks up for. Iceboat comes up from Ardenmouth the next morning with the temple house's man aboard. He comes down the ladder onto the boards in a good coat with a case under his arm, and he is met at the bottom of it by a woman of 21 with a ring of keys in her fist and Bet Onslow's slate under her other arm. She does not shout at him. She does arithmetic at him, and she does it on the open boards with the whole town end listening. What the fee is, what the passage costs, what a girl who cannot work is understood to be worth in Ardenmouth, and what the difference is and where the difference goes. what the pier paid last month for the fish that came off the deep water and whose slate it went on and whose name is on that slate. Then she tells him what she weighs at that scale in a week, in coppers, twice, because she learned that off Bet Onslow, and she asks him whether the Temple House would like a woman who can do that or would prefer to keep the fee. He starts 3 sentences. She lets him finish none of them, and she is not rude. She simply has more figures than he does. And she says the only thing all morning that is not arithmetic. There is no house at Ardenmouth with my name on the door of it, she says. There is one here. It has keys, and I am holding them. He goes back up the ladder. Sook Marin charges him 2 coppers for a bowl he does not eat and takes it with 2 fingers. Ione ends it. Not me. I am standing 30 feet down the boards with a coil in my hands, and I do not say one word in any of it. And afterwards, Bet Onslow says twice that the girl did it on her own. Sabe Kessel takes work at the scale that week. No boat, no name, nothing owed to him by anybody. And he comes up the boards and asks Bet Onslow for a job on the beam, and she gives him one. And by the 3rd day, the 2 of them are the finest thing on that pier. She says 4 coppers, 4 coppers. He says 4 coppers. She says 210, 210. He says it after her. It comes out as a round of 3, and the whole board start timing their arrival at the scale to catch it. He is good at it. He has weighed fish his whole life, and he does not make mistakes. And he stands where his brother used to stand and takes the numbers off a woman who does not belong to his family. That evening, Ione knots the 22nd tooth onto the line and counts it from the beginning with her fingers, out loud, in the dark. Then she puts the keys on the same nail as the line, and that is where they live from then on. Down at the far end of the pier, Sook Marin watches Toller Kessel stand at the last mooring on his own for a while, tapping the rail twice at nothing. She says one short thing to Bet Onslow about it, quietly, and Bet Onslow does not say it twice, and the 2 of them go back to shutting the scale up for the night. At dusk, 4 boats come up the channel on the flood and tie along the good side as though they had been doing it for years. Good side is Kessel water, 5 coppers a week, and nobody comes out to argue about it. Vesadrune steps off the first hull and walks down to the town end with her hands in her coat pockets. She goes to Piet-Vein. She sits down beside him on the boards, and she asks him something, and she waits, and she is still sitting there when it gets dark. Then she puts money into his hand in front of everybody at that end of the pier and closes his fingers on it and thanks him out loud. I am 40 feet away with a slate in my hand, counting the day off with Bet Onslow, and I look up and see her pay an old man on my own boards for something, and I go back to my figures. Hesapel asked me again, the day the new hull came up the river, exactly as she said she would on the 2nd morning, and I said yes, and she has been in that boat for 3 weeks. She is the best pair of hands I have ever had beside me, and I include 11 years of crab boats in that. She talks all the time she is working and stops dead when she is thinking, so you always know what she is doing. She takes a share. That is how it is done on this river, and it is how it was done on the boats I came off, and it is a good share, and I have never once shorted her a copper of it. Then, in the 2nd week of the rains not arriving, she stands on the boards with her bag already on her shoulder and tells me to my face that she is going to Vesadrune. Weekly, she says. 14 coppers every Friday put into my hand whether the boats went out or not. I tell her what a share off my water came to last month, and it is more than double that, and I say the figure, and I say it in coppers because that is the only way I have ever known how to argue. I know what it came to, she says. I was on the thwart when it came to it, and a share of a catch is a promise about the future, and I have had one of those before off a man, and I buried him in the spring and there was nothing to eat in the house in the summer. Say the number again, because I have nothing else in my hands to put on the boards. That is a very good number, she says. It is not money. Money is what is in your hand on the day the water is too high to go out, and a widow cannot put a good number in a pot and boil it. Then she says the thing that goes into me and stays there. I am not leaving because you are hard to work for, she says. You are not. I am leaving because you are one man, and one man is weather. And then she stands there. She stands there for about 4 seconds with her bag on her shoulder, and there is one sentence in the world that keeps her on that boat, and it is a short one, and it is about wanting her to stay. I do not say it. I tell her that Friday is a good day for it and that she will not be short of work, and I hold the boat for her while she steps off it, and she goes up the boards to the good side and puts her bag down on one of Vesadrune's decks. Ovinak watches all of it from 12 feet away with a bucket in his hand and does not say a word to me for the rest of the morning. Vesadrune does not compete with me. I want that understood, because for a month I keep waiting for her to, and she never does it once. She does not put a boat on my water. She does not bid against me at the scale, or undercut me down at the coast, or send a man out to see where I set my lines. She asks people things. That is the whole of it. And it takes me an embarrassing length of time to notice that it is happening, and by then, it has happened. She asks Dab what I do with the bait before dawn. He is on the pilings with his jar, and she sits down on the boards above him, which nobody does, and she asks him one question, and then she waits. And Dab has never in his life had a grown person sit down and wait for an answer from him. So he tells her that I bleed the bait the night before and keep it in river water, and not in a bucket of fresh, and that I do it because the smell carries differently, and that I go out on the last of the ebb and not the first of the flood, and that I count the rap on my fist and always take 3. Then she asks him how he knows all that. Because I watch him every morning, says Dab. Every morning since the first one. He gives him work, shore work, baiting for 4 boats at the shore end at a copper a jar, and keeping the trays and running the count up to whoever is on the scale, and she pays him weekly on the same Friday as everybody else. Not a hull. She never once offers him a berth in a hull, and that is not an oversight, because Vesadrun does not have oversights. He will not get into a boat, and she has found him the one job on this river that a boy who will not get into a boat can be proud of. She asks the widows what they need. There are 9 of them down at that end of Pilewater who crew when they can and mend nets when they cannot, and I have been giving them fish for 2 months. She does not give them fish. She asks them what they need, and they say money on a day of the week, and she says 14 coppers every Friday, and by the end of that month, all 9 of them are hers. I have fed those women for 2 months. She asked them one question and paid them on a Friday, and they went, and every one of them is still perfectly glad to see me on the boards, and that makes it worse and not better. The theories about the marks have got as far up as the moon. There is a man at Sook Marin's counter who will tell you the bands come up in the dark of the moon and go down at the full, and he has been watching them since the feast day and has it written on the back of a tide table. Nettle Onslow corrects him, publicly, thoroughly, at length, and using entirely the wrong figures, because Nettle has been counting from the water day and the man has been counting from the feast. The pair of them go at it for a quarter of an hour in front of 40 people, while the actual answer stands 11 feet off gutting a fish and says nothing. Neither of them asks me. Nobody in Pilewater has asked me once in 3 months, and I have not offered. I take 2 out of that water in the 4 days after Hesse goes, and both of them are good, and the second one is the best single thing I have ever put on Bet Onslow's plate. 380, she says, twice, and Sabe Kessel says 380, and the whole board say the second one along with her. There are 5 men standing round that scale who would each have taken a berth off me a month ago, and not one of them asks now, because every one of them has heard what I said to Hesse Pell. My answer to all of it is the only answer I have ever had for anything, which is to work harder and to work on my own. I go out on both tides. I set more line than one man can safely run, and then I run it anyway, and I bring more up in that fortnight than in the 2 months before it, and the teeth on the line over our door go from 22 to 31. Ione takes all of that apart on a Tuesday evening with about 4 sentences, and I have nothing to put against any one of them. She is counting the line when she starts. 31, she says, and then she asks me how many people are in the boat. 1, I say. And when Hesse Pell told you she was going, she says, what did you say to her? I tell her I said that Friday was a good day for it. She puts her hand flat on the line and leaves it there. You do not ask, she says. You have never once asked anybody in this delta for anything. You have been in this house 3 months, and you have never asked me for one thing, and I have watched you go past that old man 40 times. Tell her that Piet Vane talks nonsense, and has not finished a sentence since the day I got here. He has not been asked a question since the day you got here, she says. Vesadrun has asked him 3. I heard her do it from the top of the ladder on the night you were in the cut, and she was still sitting there an hour later. There's no answer to that. I stand in my own doorway and turn a hook over in my fingers, and I have nothing, and she does not press it, and she does not soften it either. Then she says the last of it. You think asking is the same as owing, she says. On the water it might be. Up here it is how people find out you are one of them. At the town end, on a gray afternoon with the wind gone round, Vesadrun sits down next to Piet Vane for the 3rd time. She has already had the night in the cut off him, and the 4 men, and the north wind. This time she asks him one question, and it is the right one, and it is the one nobody else on the Ossa has thought to ask in 60 years. What does that channel do when the rains turn it over? He tells her. It takes him a long time and he starts over twice. He tells her the water stacks and the bars move overnight and the cut turns bottom over top for about 40 days. He tells her the fish go out of it entirely and that they do not go up and they do not go down. They simply are not there, and that a man who works that channel in the rains will come home empty for a month and think he has lost his hand. And he tells her when. Not the almanac date that everybody on this river counts off, but what the sky does about 3 weeks before, and what the wind does, and what the water tastes like off the shore end when it is coming. Then he says the last of it. It is coming now, he says. Vesadrun waits and then asks him whether anybody else on this river has been told. Nobody has asked me, he says. Not in 11 years, and not once before that either. She pays him 6 silver into his hand, and she closes his fingers on it, and she thanks him by name and gets up, and there is no threat anywhere in it, and there is not one raised voice, and it costs me the whole season. She goes back up the boards and tells her people to bring the nets in quietly, boat by boat, over 2 days, and to lay in oil and salt, and nobody on that pier notices her doing it, because it looks exactly like a woman tidying up. Rains come in one night. They come 20 days before anybody's count. I am out on the last of the ebb when the sky goes the color of a bruise from the northeast, and by the time I am at the mooring, the first of it is on the water so hard the whole river is smoking. Bet Onslow gets her scale under cover and says the date twice. Sook Marin has her pan in before the second squall, and along the good side of the pier, every one of Vesadrune's 4 boats is already tied up short with the nets in and the hatches down, and her people are indoors. And Hesapel is standing in a doorway with 14 coppers in her pocket, watching it come. I stand on my own deck in the dark with the rain going through my shirt, and I count off what I know about that channel. And every single thing I know about it is about to stop being true, and the one man alive who could have told me that is asleep at the shore end with 6 silver under his pillow. 4 days into the rains, at the storeroom door, with the water coming off the eaves in a sheet and everybody in that house indoors. Merle Kessel prices her daughter out loud in front of me. She does not do it to be cruel. She is arguing about a hull of all things about whether the house should stand a share of the caulking on the new boat, and she reaches for the only kind of figure she has ever had in her hands. This house kept that girl 17 years at a cost, she says. And she says the cost, per year, to the copper, and then she says what the Temple House would have paid against it, and then she says that a family that has carried a loss that long is owed a share of a hull. And I answer the number. I am standing there with a caulking iron in my hand and my mouth full of arithmetic, and I hear a figure that is wrong, so I correct it. The yearly cost is high by a fifth, I tell her, because she has counted the fish at market rate, and the fish came out of her own water. The Temple House figure is 2 years old. Then I give her a better sum than the one she started with. It takes about 4 seconds. I do it well. It is the best piece of arithmetic anybody does in that house all week, and I win the argument outright. Ione is 4 feet behind me with a bowl in her hands. There is exactly one thing I have promised myself since the first night in this delta, and it is not about fish, and it is not about Kessels, and it is that nobody is going to price that woman inside her own house where she can hear it, and a price gets set in front of her, and the man who swore that goes straight past the insult and into the sum, because a sum is a thing he knows how to hold. She does not say a word. She puts the bowl down on the shelf and goes up the stairs with her hand on the wall, and I stand in the doorway with the iron in my fist, and Merle Kessel says, into the silence, that she supposes the caulking will come out of the boat's share then. 2 evenings later, the rain lifts for a few hours, and the river goes flat and gray and quiet, and the whole pier is out on the boards drying things. Ione asks me to take her out past the last bar. She has not asked anybody for that in 2 years. She asked her father when she was 13, and he said the water is no place. She asked Toller at 15, and he laughed at her, and Sabe at 16, who said he would and then did not, 3 separate times. She asked her mother at 18, and her mother said a girl who cannot see the water has no business on it, and she has not asked one living soul since. She tells me all of that in about 6 sentences, on the boards, in front of Bet Onslow's scale, with 40 people down at the stall and the light going gold off the wet planks. Then she says the rest of it. I know that water by every sound it makes off these piles, she says. I have never once been on it. I am 21 years old, and I have lived my whole life 11 feet above a river I have never touched from a boat. And she asks me, out loud, in public. A woman who has stopped asking asks me for the one thing she wants, and she does it in front of 40 people because she is not going to be talked out of it in a doorway. I look up the boards. That is all of it, and it is all the time it takes. There are 40 faces at the town end. Raoul Tesk is watching. Iber Small is watching. 2 young downriver men off a hull that came up yesterday are watching, and one of them is grinning at something else entirely. And for 1 second, I see myself putting a blind woman into a boat in front of all of them, and I do not want to be looked at doing it. The boat is not safe, I say. Not in the rains. The bars have moved and the water is stacked, and I would not take a sound crew out there this week. Every word of that is true. There is not one false fact anywhere in it, and it is the biggest lie I tell in my life, and she hears it the way blind people hear a lie, which is to say, instantly and completely, and from underneath the words. What does that boat weigh, she says. 940 pounds dry, I say, and I have answered her before I have heard what she has actually asked me. She stands there for a moment, and then she says, thank you, very politely, and goes back up the ladder, and 40 people go back to drying nets, and Bet Onslow does not say anything twice. An hour before that, at Sook Marin's counter, the 2 downriver men are deciding that it is funny. They are 20 and 22, up on the flood with a load of reed, drinking Sook Marin's tea. Blind girl wants a boat ride, says the one with the bad boots, who is Kelder Shaw. His brother is Oven, and Oven is the one who laughs at it. We could take her, says Kelder. Out past the bar, round the top of the cut, back for supper. We could put her out on the middle bar and see how long it takes her to notice. Sook Marin has a pan full and 11 bowls in front of her, and she hears every single word of it and cannot get out from behind her own counter. By the time she is round the end of her own counter with her hands wiped, they are 20 feet up the boards. She is 3 minutes too slow, and she stands there and says a word she does not use in front of paying customers. They take her out on the last light of the day, and they are polite about it. They come to the foot of the ladder and offer, and they tell her they are going up past the bar anyway, and there is a thwart free, and Ione Kessel has waited 8 years for that sentence out of anybody's mouth. She goes with them. Of course she goes with them, and so would I, and so would anybody who had been told no for 8 years. Put her out on the middle bar in the dark. They row her in and get her onto the sand with a hand under her arm, and one of them says, "Here we are," and the other one laughs. Then they push off and go. They do it for a joke, and they are 80 yards away before she has understood that she is standing on the Ossa Delta on her own. The tide is coming in. On the middle bar, in the wet season, with the water stacked, the tide comes over that sand in about 40 minutes, and it comes over it up to a tall man's chest. She counts it. She counts everything, and this delta has never once bothered to find out that she does. She has counted teeth and coppers and beam weights and the number of steps to the scale for 2 years, and she stands out on a sandbar in the dark and starts counting the water. Out loud, and she is still doing it out loud when the lamps come. She counts the interval between the little waves coming over the shallow edge of the bar, and she knows the length of that interval from 11 years of listening to it come under her own floor, and it tells her which way the flood is running. Then she walks the bar, and she does not walk it toward the town. She walks up against the flood, uphill on the sand, toward the head of it. The reed cutters put a stake in the head of every bar in this delta, and have done since before her grandmother, and she has been listening to reed cutters talk under her own window her whole life. It takes her a long time, and she is up to her knees twice, and she goes down once and gets up. Then she finds that stake with her hands in the dark and gets both arms round it, and the water comes up the bar behind her and stops 8 inches short of the head of it, as it has stopped short of that stake every wet season since the delta was made. Half of pile water comes out with lamps. I am the first boat, and I am not the first there, because Sook Marin had the town end moving before I was off the boards. There are 9 hulls out on that water, and 200 lamps along the pier, and Merle Kessel is standing on the boards with her apron in her fists. We come round the head of the middle bar with the lamps up, and there she is, standing, dry to the knee, one arm round a reed cutter's stake, chin up and absolutely furious. Bet Onslow says the time twice off the pier. Oven Shaw, she says, Kelder Shaw. Those are their walks on the boards, and I want that said out loud before anybody helps me into a boat. She has never met either of them in her life. She has heard them come up a ladder once, that afternoon, and she names them off the bar in the dark with 40 feet of water between us, and she gets both of them right. The pier deals with them. I do not touch either of those men, and I do not get the chance to, and I do not need it. The time we are back on the boards, Ovinak has one of them by the collar, and Roltesk has the other. Loman Frey is standing on their hull with the painter in his hand, and Sook Marin is coming down the planks with the flat of a fry pan. They are put off that pier before midnight, and their load goes with them, and no mooring between Pilewater and the coast will take them for the rest of the season, and that is not done by me. That is the first thing my standing on that river ever does without my hands on it, and I stand there and watch 200 people do it for a woman they have all called a canceled asset since she was 11. Then the room, with nobody else in it and no lamps left out on the water. She is sitting on the bed with her boots off and the sand still in them, and I put the lamp down, and I say the true reason out loud. I was not worried about the boat, I say. The boat is fine. I have taken worse out and worse. 40 people were standing at that end of the pier, and for 1 second I did not want to be the man they watched putting his blind wife into a hull, and that is all of it, and there is nothing under it. She does not say anything for a while, and I stand there and let it be as long as it is going to be. I know, Cal, she says. I knew on the boards. I have been lied to about that water by 5 people, and you are the first one who lied to me about myself. I tell her I will take her out. Tomorrow, in the rain, any day she cares to name. No, she says. She wants it. She says that straight out, and it is worse than the other thing. I want it more than I have ever wanted anything on this river, she says, and I am not having it handed to me as an apology. Then she asks me to put the lamp out, and I put the lamp out, and neither of us sleeps much, and in the morning the cut has turned over. It happens in one night, 4 days after the rain sets in, and it is exactly what Piet Vane told a woman with a folded chart 3 weeks ago. The water is stacked from bank to bank and running the wrong way underneath the top of it. The bars have moved overnight, and the one I set my long line off is simply not there. The channel that has fed this town for 4 months is empty from the top of it to the bottom, and I go out on both tides and come home with nothing at all. 40 days of that. Everything I know about that water is wrong for 40 days, and there is one man alive who could have told me so in a single sentence, and he has been sitting on those planks for 4 months with a pipe in his teeth, and nobody has asked him. And 100 yards off the reed banks, in 4 feet of water, where nothing that size can physically be, something takes a net off a stake in front of 2 reed cutters and does not leave the stake. The reed cutters lose a second net 2 days later, off a stake in 4 feet of water, and this time, the stake goes with it. 4 feet. A grown man stands up in 4 feet of the Ossa with his shoulders dry. Nothing lives in the shallow off those reed banks except barfish the length of your hand, and something has taken a net and a driven stake out of it while 2 men stood 20 yards away on the mud and watched the reeds go over. They come and tell me because I am the man who goes down. I stand on that bank and look at the hole where a stake was and at the drag mark going away from it, and the drag mark is the width of the boards on the pier. Grandmother, says the reed cutter who has one shoe. It is what he says about a lost shoe and a wet summer and his brother's marriage. And he says it as he always says it, and for the first time in the history of this delta, he is right. I do not say anything, because I have been over the top of it in the dark at 60 feet with my hands on a line, and I have not told one living soul. And every man in Pilewater is still standing on those boards asking the man next to him why the cut has gone empty. It is empty because she is not in it. That is the answer, and it takes me 11 days longer than it should to say it out loud to myself, and by then, it has cost me the season. 40 days. That is what Piet Vane told a woman with a folded chart 3 weeks ago, and 40 days is what this delta gets. Day 1. I go out on the new hull and set 2 long lines in water that has never once failed me, and I bring up nothing at all. Day 2. Bet Onslow has to write nothing on her slate against my name, and she says it twice because she says everything twice, and she says it as kindly as a person can say a nothing. Day 3. The surge takes the boat. It comes up the river at 2 in the morning, behind the third squall, and it is the surge Piet Vane described to Vessedrune 3 weeks ago in about 9 words, and every one of her hulls is tied short with a spring on the bow. Mine is tied the way you tie a boat on the Ossa in a wet season, which is properly by a man who has moored in a following sea for 22 years, and the mooring holds, and the cleat comes out of the deck. 9 silver and 4 coppers goes down the delta on the ebb, with a piece of my foredeck still bolted to the rope. I did not lose that boat by seamanship. Nobody who has ever seen me tie a knot would say that, and no man on that pier said it. I lost her because one person on this river knew that surge was coming, and he had told exactly one person, and she paid him 6 silver for it, and I walked past him 40 times. That is not the water beating me. That is one conversation I did not have, standing in for a whole season. So I go back to the rotten skiff. She is still there under the town end where Toller gave her to me on the first morning, with the plank sprung at the 3rd frame and the bailing can gone, and I pull her out and put a patch on and go out in her again on the 4th day of the wrong river. On the 2nd of those days, the patch at the 3rd frame lets go in stacked water 100 yards off the reed banks, and the skiff fills and goes down under me in 4 feet of gray river, and I am in it with both hands empty. 4 feet. I get a hand on the gunwale in about 2 seconds, and it is the longest 2 seconds of the wet season, and there is nobody within half a mile to see a man who has been 60 feet down in the dark go stiff as a bollard in water he could stand up in. I bail her out and go home and mention it to nobody. Nobody will crew with me. That is not the marks anymore. It is arithmetic. A share of a catch that does not exist is nothing, and every hand on that pier has watched Hesse Pell take 14 coppers off Vessedrune every Friday since the rain started in her hand, whether the boats went out or not. Ovinak comes and stands on the boards and looks at the skiff and tells me the truth, which is that he has 2 at home and cannot do it, and he is ashamed and I tell him not to be, and he goes and works for Vessedrune on a Friday wage. Dab will not get into a hull, and nobody on that pier asks him to, and the skiff sits down at the stall end with 1 man in it. And what I get wrong for a fortnight, out loud, at Sookmaren's counter, to anybody who will stand still long enough, is that I keep saying Vessedrune is outfishing me. She is not outfishing me. There are no fish for Vessedrune either. Her boats come in as empty as my skiff does, every single day of those 40, and I have looked in her hulls. The difference is that she has 20 boats and a Friday, and I am 1 man and a promise. Her people eat through a bad month because money arrives on a day of the week. Mine do not eat at all, because a share of nothing is nothing, and a widow cannot boil a good number. Hessepel said that to my face on the boards with her bag already packed, and I answered her with a figure, and she was right and I was not. 4 days running, I come back with an empty skiff in front of a pier that has spent 4 months watching me come back with monsters. The first of those days, Nettle Onslow explains to me why the channel is empty. He has a theory about the moon and the rain and the tide tables. He has it written out, and it takes him 11 minutes. It is wrong in every particular. There is 1 man on that pier who could correct him in a sentence, and I stand there pretending I cannot hear either of them. On the 2nd, Merle Kessel weighs my supper on her own little scale and gives me the full portion, exactly fair, to the 1/4 ounce, and says not 1 word about it. That is the worst thing that has ever happened to me at that table. On the 3rd, Toller Casil comes down to the town end and stands there while I tie up empty, and he taps the rail twice, and then he does not say the sentence. He has waited 4 months for that sentence. He stands on those boards with it in his mouth and does not use it, and then he goes back up the pier, and I have no idea what stopped him. On the 4th, Sookmaren puts a bowl down in front of me at her own counter and picks the 3 coppers up off the wood. She says nothing about it, and she does not make a moment out of it. She sets the bowl down, I put the coppers on the wood, she takes them up with 2 fingers and drops them in the pot, and then she asks the next man what he wants. The last time she would not touch my money. 40 people stood there and watched her not touch it. This time, nobody in Pilewater notices at all except me, and I have to put my face down over the bowl for a moment. It is the only thing banked in that fortnight, and it is a stall woman picking 3 coppers off her own counter. The other one is the boy. Dab comes down to the town end while the skiff is tied up and gets into her and sits on the middle thwart with his hands in his lap, and the boat is made fast and going nowhere. He does not explain himself. I do not ask him to, and I do not ask him anything at all, and I sit on the boards with a splice in my hands, and he sits in the skiff, and we do that for a good while most evenings, and neither of us mentions it once. Then the bands stop. They do not climb, because nobody is eating what I take out of that water, because I am not taking anything out of that water. The rule has not changed, and it has never once bent, and it is the first time in 4 months I have been on the wrong side of it. And on about the 20th day, one of them fades. The one on the inside of my wrist, the third one, the one the whole pier saw first. It goes from wet rope to old bruise, and my hands are back to being ordinary hands, and I get down to 4 minutes and change, and I stop trying. Ione finds it with her fingers on a Thursday night, counting the way she counts, and her hand stops for about half a second. She does not say anything about it. She finishes the count, tells me a number that is the same as the number she told me yesterday, and goes and puts the kettle on, and she does not tell me she has found it, and I do not tell her I know she has. Somewhere in the middle of those 40 days, on an evening with no rain in it, I get the thing I have wanted since the first hour I was in this world. Ione puts a plate on our own table, in our own house, with a door on it. She sits down with hers. The lamp is lit, the room is warm, and there is nobody standing over me watching to see how much I take. Hot food, indoors, sitting down, no eyes on me. 4 months I have wanted that. I have priced it out loud at Sook Marin's counter, and Sook once quoted me a better rate on my own funeral, and she was fair, because I had priced that out loud too, and got it wrong by half. And I cannot eat it. I sit at my own table with the best food I have had since I got here, and I put the spoon down twice, and my wife eats her supper and does not look up, and does not ask, and lets me not eat it, and that is the loudest room I have ever been in. His own table, 100 miles down the river, Reeve Halloran Speak is having the best evening he has had in 9 years. Vessadroon has come to him with a folded chart she does not open, and a decent bottle she does. She asks after his wife, and she means it, and he talks about his wife for a quarter of an hour, and she sits through all of it. Then she tells him what she has done. The Crown's post on the Asa Delta has a price, as every post on that river has a price, and she has been down to Ardenmouth, and she has paid it, and the paper is signed, and it is signed for the spring. He tells him to his face, in his own dining room, before he has heard it from anybody else, because she thinks he is owed that. And she tells him the rest of it, which is that Ardenmouth has read his survey of the deep channel and thinks very highly of it, and that the posting he has wanted for 9 years is in the same envelope. Reeve Halloran Speak thanks her. He gets up and shakes her hand with both of his and thanks her twice, and he asks after her health. And for once in his life, he is not about to take anything off anybody. There is no threat anywhere in that room. Nobody raises a voice. A woman buys the Crown's authority over 100 miles of water out from under the man sitting opposite her, and he is grateful to her for it, and I am not there, and nobody consults me, and I do not hear about any of it for 11 days. On the 32nd day of the wrong river, the rain thins out at last, and the Ardenmouth iceboat comes up the delta on the flood. She is a big hull with a copper stripe, and she ties on the good side without asking anybody, and there is a woman in the stern of her in a coat worth more than this pier. She comes up the ladder herself and down the boards to the town end, where I am bailing the rotten skiff out with a can I have borrowed off a bait boy, and she stops in front of me and takes off one glove. Ilse Vantry, she says. Ice, salt, and hulls. She shakes my hand with the bare one, which nobody in Ardenmouth does with anybody at this end of the river, and then she puts the glove in her pocket and leaves it there. And she does not put it back on again while she is in Pilewater. Before she says one word about a boat, Ilse Vantry asks to watch me work, and it is not a test and not a condition of anything. She has bought fish out of 9 rivers for 26 years, she says, and she has never once bought off a man she had not seen with his hands wet, and she would like to stand on these boards and watch, and she would like it to be today. The water is still wrong, the bars are still where they should not be, and the channel is still empty, and the rain has thinned to the sort that goes on for a week without ever properly arriving. So I take her out on the rotten skiff, because that is what I have, and she gets into it in that coat without a word about the plank at the 3rd frame. And I put something on the boards for her to look at, not out of the cut, because there is nothing at all in the cut. I go up under the reed banks into 4 feet of gray water, where the barfish have gone to get out of the stacked river, and I work that shallow the way you work a scoured hole in a northern harbor when the sea has shut the grounds. Slowly, on a short line, on my knees in the bilge. It takes 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it is the least impressive thing I have ever done in front of a stranger. And at the end of it, there are 90 pounds of barfish in the bottom of a rotten skiff. 90 pounds. 4 coppers, 100 weight. It comes to 3 coppers and a fraction, and Bet Onslow says the whole miserable figure twice. Vantry's people watch the entire thing from the rail of the iceboat and do not believe one part of it, because the men she employs have been told for a fortnight that this river is finished until the water turns, and they have watched 20 of Vessadroon's hulls come in empty every day day since they arrived. Then Sook Marin fries all of it, and the town end eats it standing up in the wet, and every one of them says the weight twice. I take my own share on a plate and eat it out on the boards in the rain with the plate in my hand, the way I have eaten every meal in this delta except one. Ilse Vantry stands under her umbrella 11 feet off and watches me do that as well. She watches that for a long time, considerably longer than she watched the fishing. Then she makes the offer, and she makes it once, and there is no trick anywhere in it, and I go looking for one twice while she is still talking and do not find it. An Ardenmouth hull cow, she says. Seagoing, 34 feet, iron on the forward stem so you can put her nose into anything, built in the yard I own and finished by the man who finishes mine. 60 gold of boat, handed to you on the water, no debt against it. Ice for everything I take out of that channel, at her own ice house rate, which is nothing at all, because she is the woman who owns the ice. 3 gold a hundredweight for what comes out of the deep water, delivered to Ardenmouth, which is a figure so far above 9 coppers that Bet Onslow makes me say it twice and then says it twice herself. A house on the harbor with a door that locks, she says. Stone, 2 rooms and a stove, and a table that nobody stands over. She puts that last before the other last thing, and she puts it there because she has spent an afternoon watching a man eat off a plate in his hand in the rain. Then she says the last item on the list, in exactly the same voice she has used for the ice and the hull and the stove. There is a physician on Cutler Street in Ardenmouth who has opened eyes like your wife's, she says. River fever at 11, scarring on the front of the eye, nothing damaged behind it. He has done it twice and both of them see. He has failed once, and the woman he failed was blind before and is blind now and is in pain as well, and the pain is his doing. She does not wait for me to ask about the failure. She says it without being asked, on her own, first time. And it is the single most dangerous thing she does all week. 4 gold to look at her, and he will not take money to try until he has looked. I have nothing in my hands. I have a rotten skiff, a patched plank, 3 coppers, and a fraction on Bet Onslow's slate, and 1 band on my wrist gone the color of an old bruise. And what nearly takes me is not the boat. It is not the 60 gold or the iron prow or 3 gold a hundredweight. It is the table. 2 rooms, a stove, a door that locks, and nobody standing over me counting what I take. I have wanted that since 11 minutes after I arrived in this world, and I have priced it out loud at a fry stall, and I have had it once in my own house for one evening, and I could not eat it. Ilse Vantry has never met me before this week. She has watched me for one afternoon, and she has found the one thing in me that is for sale, and she is not cruel, and she is not lying, and she does not even know she has done it. She sits with Ione the next morning, and I am not there, and neither is anybody else on that pier. She does not lie about the odds. Twice done and once failed, she says. And she says what failed means. And she says the woman's name because that woman has a name. She does not lie about the price. 4 gold to look, and then a figure to try. And she says out loud that she would pay both of them, and that she would want nothing for it, and that Ione should not believe the second half of that sentence from anybody, including her. Ione asks her what a hundredweight of iced deep water fish sells for in Ardenmouth in a wet spring, and then in a dry autumn. Vantry tells her both, and then tells her the difference and why, and the 2 of them are 20 minutes on that before either of them says the word eyes again. Then Ione decides, and she does not decide it as one single person on that pier would have guessed she would. I will come and be looked at, she says. Alone, on your ice boat, and I will take Hesapel with me because she works for money and not for kindness. And I will pay the 4 gold out of what the scale takes, she says, because the scale is mine, and Bet Onslow says so twice. And I will not have the house, she says, and I will not have the hull either. Vantry asks her why not, and Ione tells her. A woman who was handed a set of keys 11 days ago is not going to be bought a door, she says. I have got one. It is a bad door in a bad house on a pier that floods, and it opens when I open it. Then she says the rest of it, which Vantry repeats to me afterwards word for word because she thinks I should have it. If he takes that boat for my eyes, she says, then I am the reason he stopped being the man who holds that water, and I would rather stay as I am than be that. I refuse Ilse Vantry that afternoon, out on the open boards, in front of her own people, and I do it extremely badly. I have been working on it since dawn. I have 3 sentences ready. They are good sentences, and I have said them over to myself in a skiff twice. What comes out of my mouth in front of 11 Ardenmouth men is about the Delta's hunger and a channel nobody else can work, and a boy who will not set foot in a hull. It goes on far too long, and not one word of it is the sentences. And I stop in the middle of it and tell her the true one, which is that if I take her hull, this river has 1 fewer man who can go down, and it already only has 1. She puts her bare hand out and shakes mine. She has wanted somebody to refuse her for a reason she respected for about 15 years, she says, and she has been refused a great many times, and every one of them was about price. She says thank you, and she means it, and she is the only person in any of this who gets exactly what she wanted by losing. Then the pier does the thing I never asked it to do. Her ice boat wants loading. It always wants loading. It has wanted loading in pile water twice a season for 9 years, and there are 11 men and a hoist and a stack of salt on the good side. Nobody comes. Not one hand on that whole pier. Ovinak does not come, and he works for Vesadrun. Raoul Tesk does not come. Ibersmall does not come. The reed cutters do not come, and they have no interest in me whatsoever. And Loman Frey rows past the ice boat twice with his hat on and does not look up. Sook Marin serves her people at the counter, politely, at the correct price, and will not send her stall boy down to the hoist. There is still no stall boy. That is not the point, and everybody understands it is not the point. Dab is asked by an Ardenmouth clerk to bait 4 trays, and says he is spoken for, and that is true, and then says he is spoken for on the days he is not, and that is not. Sabi Kessel says the last 3 words of the request, and then says 4 coppers, in Bet Onslow's exact voice, and goes on working the beam. I did not ask for any of that. I did not know it was happening until the middle of the afternoon, and when I did know it, I went down the boards and told 4 men to go and load the boat, and 3 of them said they would, and none of them did. In her cabin that evening, the Ardenmouth clerk, who cannot stand the smell of this pier, gives Ilse Vantry the list, and he does it properly, item by item, with the handkerchief still in his fist. 11 men approached, and 11 refusals. The stall, the scale, the bait, and 2 moorings that will take her lines, and neither of which will take her salt. He says he has never seen a river do this over a man who owns nothing, and asks whether she wishes him to raise it with the reeve, and points out that the reeve's post changes hands in the spring. Ilse Vantry listens to all of that list without once interrupting him, and she does not ask him a single thing about the salt. Then she asks him about the fish. What 90 pounds of barfish looked like coming out of 4 feet of water in a rotten skiff on the worst day of the worst month this river has had in 11 years. Whether he saw how the man got a short line in under the reeds, what he supposes a man like that could do out of a hull with iron on the nose of it. The clerk says that he did not see the fishing. He was in the cabin all afternoon with the ledgers. She tells him to have the salt put back in the hold and to enter nothing against the town and to be ready to sail on the next flood. She takes it well. That is the whole trouble with Ilse Vantry, and it is much worse than being cheated by somebody would have been. She is on the ladder the next morning with 1 glove still off when she says the sentence that starts everything after it. You have just made every hungry mouth in 100 miles your own problem, she says. You hold the only water on this river with anything in it. Nobody but you can work it, and there is one of you. I tell her that I have held it 4 months already, and that is 4 months longer than anybody else has. You held it while the water was good, she says. Now it is going to turn back, and the whole delta is going to come to those boards and ask you for the deep channel, and it does not transfer. Whatever it is that lets you down there is in your body, and your body cannot be in 9 boats. And she puts the bare hand out and shakes mine for the 3rd time in 2 days, and goes down the ladder into her own boat and sails on the high water with her salt still in the hold. The rain eases off over 3 days, and the water starts putting itself back where it was, and the whole delta comes to the boards at pile water, and it does not come to look at me. It comes up those boards to ask me for the channel. They come in 3s and 4s off hulls I have never seen, from moorings 40 miles down, and they stand at the town end with their hats in their hands and put it to me plainly. The dry is coming. Every household on this river is 4 weeks behind on what it eats, and the only water with anything left in it is 60 feet deep and belongs to whoever can go down into it. Bet Onslow writes the names on her slate as they arrive because she cannot help herself, and by the 2nd morning, there are 31 names on it, and she says the number twice. I say yes. Of course I say yes. There was never 1 second in which I was going to say anything else to any of them, and it is the worst decision I make in the entire time I am in that delta, because saying yes to 31 boats means telling men who are not me to go into the cut, and I have been down there, and they have not. I send 2 crews out on the first clean morning, and I do it properly, and that matters more than anything else I have to say about that week. I go over the water with both skippers on the boards with a piece of chalk, the bars, the slack, the wrong current under the top, where to set and where not to, and how long they have on the turn. Ansarobi takes the first one. 42, a shoulder that has never been right since a hoist went over on him at 19, and a wife on the boards called Marta, who watches him cast off with her arms folded. Come back frightened, both crews. Neither of them loses a man, and neither of them loses a hole, and they come up the boards white to the lips and put their loads on Bet Onslow's plate and go home without their money. Something went under Ansarobi's boat. That is all any of them will say about it for 2 days, and how they say it is the trouble. Went under her, he says, long as the pier did not touch her. He is out on that water for 9 hours, and it goes under him twice, and the 2nd time it lifts the stern about a foot and puts it back down, and Ansarobi sits on those boards with his bad shoulder shaking and tells me he cannot go out there again for any money. Marta Roby says one thing to me on the boards while she is taking his coat off him. He has been on this river since he was 9, she says. Do not send him where you would not send yourself. Would go, I say. That is the trouble, she says, and takes him home along the boards with one hand under his arm. So I do what I have done since the first morning of all this, which is to go and put my own body into it. I go out on the next tide with the rotten skiff and a new 15 copper line, and I stay out for 2 days, and I go down 4 times, and I get all of it wrong. Not the diving. The diving is fine, and my breath is back up to 5 minutes because the boards have eaten what I brought in off the reeds, and I go down and find her twice at the west end of the channel, lying along the sand in the dark. I have no way to do anything about her, and that is the thing my hands cannot fix. A man alone on a line with a hook cannot take a thing the length of a pier. You could put 11 hooks in her, and she would go down the channel with all 11 and 100 fathoms of my rope and never notice. And while I am doing that, nobody works the cut. 31 boats sit tied up along 100 miles of river waiting for one man to come up and tell them it is safe, and it is not safe, and every one of those days is a day of the dry coming. Come in on the second evening with an empty skiff, and Ione is on the boards at the top of the ladder, and I tell her what I found and what I could not do. She does not comfort me. She has never once done that at the moments when I have deserved it least, and this is one of them. You have been out there 2 days on your own, she says. What did you eat out there? I tell her, and it is not much of an answer, and she waits through all of it. And how many of those 31 boats went out while you were down there proving you could not do it by yourself, she says. That is the second time in 4 months that I have nothing at all to put against a sentence, and I stand there on my own boards with a wet line over my shoulder and take it. The word changes that week, and the word is the man who holds the cut. I have been called that since Ardenmouth, and until this week it has been said the way a title gets said. Now it comes at me off a downriver hull out of a man whose family is on half rations, and he says it as an accusation, and there is not one thing wrong with it. You are the man who holds the cut, he says, so hold it then. Nettle Onslow sees the wake first. He is on the boards at 11:30 at night doing something to a net that does not need doing, and he sees it come up the middle of the moorings inside the town, and he starts telling people, and nobody believes him because he tells it exactly as badly as it is possible for a thing to be told. He starts with the tide, then he corrects himself about the tide, then he starts again from the beginning, and he is on his fourth sentence about displacement when the piling goes. I hear it before it happens. That is the newest thing I have, and I have not mentioned it to a soul. Under the water, I have been able to hear something big moving before it moves for about a fortnight, and standing on a floor 11 feet above the river on a still night with my boots off, I can hear it too. It is not a sound. It is the piles talking to each other about a weight that is coming, and I am up off the mat and out the door before the first shout, and I get 4 men off the good side of the pier and onto the ladder in about 90 seconds, and one of them is Toller Kessel in his nightshirt. Then the good side lifts about 8 inches and hangs there and comes back down again. She takes a hull. Not mine, because mine is a rotten skiff at the bottom of the pier, and not one of Vesadrune's, because those are on the outside of everything with springs on their bows. She takes Ibersmall's boat off her mooring with the mooring still in her and the piling still on the mooring, and goes down the channel with all 3 of them. The piling comes out of the delta floor, 9 inches of tarred pine, driven in by somebody's grandfather, and it goes out of that pier like a tooth out of a jaw, and the boards over it drop a hand's width and stay dropped. Nobody is hurt. 200 people sleep on that pier, and they are all of them awake for the rest of the night, and not one of them is hurt. The town sits up until dawn with lamps, and it does not sit up frightened, which surprises me. It sits up furious. Sook Marin has the pan going at 2 in the morning. Bet Onslow comes down and measures the hole where the piling was and says the depth twice, and Sabe Kessel says the depth. And at breakfast, the one-shoed reed cutter tells the town end that grandmother has had his other shoe as well, off the boards 3 weeks back, and he wants it noted. They blame her for the shoe and the piling in the same breath, and for the wet summer, and for Ibersmall's boat, and for a bad marriage over at the reed banks, and this time they are right about at least 3 of those. And it is the funniest hour I have ever spent on that pier, and I do not laugh once. At first light, out on the boards with her crew standing round her, Vesadrune says what has to be done about it. She holds the Crown's post on this river from the spring, and she has the water day and the moorings and every hull she ever wanted, and she stands out there at dawn with 14 people in front of her and lays it all out. 12 days until the water turns back and the first run comes up that channel. Every boat on the Ossa has to be on the deep water that day, or the whole 100 miles goes short through the dry. So the thing in the channel has to be off the channel before then, and it will take boats, and it will take men, and it will take a plan, and she says all 3 of those out loud in front of her own people and starts sorting out which of the boats she can spare. She does not mention me once, not to praise me and not to blame me. My name does not come into it anywhere, because she is not thinking about me at all. She is thinking about 100 miles of hungry river and how many hulls she has. And that is the morning I finally understand exactly what she is, standing 40 feet off with a bailing can in my hand and my mouth shut. That night, in our own room, with the piling gone and the boards dropped a hand's width outside the door, I go round it for 2 hours, and Ione lets me. She has been telling me the answer since the boy went off the bow into that channel. She tells me nothing at all now. She sits on the bed with the tooth line in her lap, counting it, and lets me walk up and down a room I could cross in 4 steps. Then I say it. There is only one way to hold that water, I say. I have to ask. Ask, she says. Say the whole of it again. I have to ask people for help, I say, out loud on the pier, with every soul on it standing there, and I have to do it 4 times. She does not say that she told me. She has been right about this since the 3rd week, and she does not spend 1 second of it. And I have thought about that a great deal since, and it is the single kindest thing anybody does for me in my life. She says the names instead. Piet Vane, she says. Vesadrune. Dab. And she stops there and counts along the line with her fingers to the end of it, and then says the fourth one, which is her own. I go and stand in front of Piet at 9 in the morning with the whole pier on the boards behind me, because if I do it at dusk with nobody there, I will have found a way to do it privately, and I am not going to be allowed that. He is sitting where he has sat for 11 years with the boat hook across his knees and the pipe already in his teeth. I need to know what happens to that channel when the water turns back, I say, and I need to know where she lies when it does. I am asking you. I have nothing to trade for it, and I should have asked you in the first week. Then I stand there on those boards and do not say one other thing to him, and I do not look at the water either. Piet takes the pipe out of his teeth and looks at it, and puts it away in his coat and puts both hands on the boat hook. Then he starts the sentence he has not finished in front of another man in 60 years, and it comes out sideways and in the wrong order, and he goes back to the beginning 3 times. It takes a quarter of an hour. There were 4 of us, he says, and my brother had the stern, and it was the second day after the wind went round, and we were setting where you sat, and I have said this before, and nobody stopped. Nobody stops him. There are 40 people out on those boards, and not one of them so much as shifts a foot on the planks. Nettle Onslow opens his mouth once, at about the 8-minute mark, on a point of fact about the wind that year, and his mother takes him by the arm and holds it, and he shuts his mouth and stays shut for the rest of it. That is Bet Onslow restraining her own son physically in front of the entire town, and it is the finest thing she ever does on those boards. And at the end of the quarter of an hour, Piet gives me the thing nobody else on this river has. She comes up out of the 60 feet when the water stacks, he says, and she goes back down into it in the 4 days after the water turns, every wet season of her life. She was up in the delta the year we went in, and we did not know it, and she came back down that channel underneath us on her way home. Then he says where? The west shoulder of the cut, in the old scour under the west shoulder, in the slack an hour before dawn because she goes down on the slack and she lies still in it, and a thing that big does not like moving water any more than a boat does. 60 years, Cal, he says, and in all of those 60 years on this pier, there has not been one man who asked me about it. I do not apologize to him. There is nothing in an apology for a man who has been sitting on those planks since before I was born. What I do instead is ask him a second question, and then a third, and stand there through both answers. By the third one, he has the pipe going again, and there are 9 people sitting down on the boards around him listening, and one of them is Nettle Onslow, taking it in. Then I go and ask Vesadrun for her boats, and that one is a negotiation, and I lose it on terms. She hears me out on her own deck. 4 boats, the long tackle off her ice hull, 12 men, and lamps, and she does not say yes, and she does not say no. She names terms, her post, her plan, her water day, and the deep channel worked to her order from the spring, she says. It is not mine, and it is not the Crown's. Hers. Every hull that goes into the cut goes on her book at her rate, and the men are paid weekly on a Friday in coin out of the first run, before any share is worked out for anybody including me. And the fourth thing, she says, which is that when it is done, I come to her and put a proposition to her, and she will consider it, and she will not tell me now what she expects the proposition to be. I take all 4 of those without arguing about a single one of them. That surprises her. It is the only time in any of it that I see Vesadrun surprised, and she covers it by looking at a cleat. She had 2 more concessions ready, and she has to put them away. You did not even try me on the Friday money, she says. Hesapel explained the Friday money to me on the boards with her bag on her shoulder, I say, and I answered her with a figure, and it took me 40 days of empty water to work out that she was right and I was wrong. Then, I go and ask Dab, and that one goes wrong in front of everybody on the pier, and it stays wrong. He is down at the stall with 4 bait trays and his own count going. I ask him properly, out loud, with Sook Marin 4 feet away and 11 people on the boards, to get into a hull and hold the deck line on the night we go for her. No, says Dab. He does not say it quietly, and he does not shuffle it. He says it standing up with a tray in his hands, to a man the whole delta calls the deep water now, in front of his own employer's crew, and then he goes back to his trays. And I let it stand, and letting it stand is the only piece of that entire day I am not ashamed of afterwards. I do not ask him twice. I do not put a hand on his shoulder and explain it. I do not go and get Sook Marin to work on him, and I do not send my wife. I say, that is fair, and I go up the boards, and it stays a refusal in front of 11 people. An hour later, he comes and finds me at the mooring on his own. He has one term. If I go, he says, I am the one who gets sent, not the one who is taken. When it comes off that water and the delta wants telling, I am the one that runs the boards and tells them. And he says the rest of it. And I am not in the bow. I will hold any line you want held, and I will not go in the bow of anything ever again. Done, I say, and I say it before he has finished. He puts his hand out to shake on it, and he has seen men do that at that scale for 2 years, and has never once been offered, and his hand is filthy, and I shake it, and Sook Marin turns round and starts frying something nobody has ordered. Then he picks his trays back up and counts them off out loud, and says 11 when there are 12, and looks at me for half a second while he does it. He has been counting wrong on this pier since he could talk so that nobody would think he was clever, and it has taken me 4 months to see it. Then Hesapel, and she makes me say the day of the week out loud. She is on Vesadrune's deck coiling, and she lets me get all of it out before she says anything, and it is more courtesy than I gave her. Weekly, she says, 14 coppers, say the day. Friday, I say. Say it again, she says, and I say Friday, and she says that will do, and picks up her bag and steps across onto my hull with it and asks me what is wrong with my mooring lines and starts doing them again properly without waiting to be asked. And then Bet Onslow, who is not on the list at all. I do not need one thing off Bet Onslow. She keeps the slate, she says the numbers, she taught my wife the beam, and there is nothing in this plan that requires one thing from her. So I ask her the only question nobody has put to her in 26 years on that scale, which is what she thinks. Not what it weighs and not what it pays. What she thinks about 4 boats and 12 men going into that channel on the slack before dawn. Bet Onslow does not say anything for so long that the boards go quiet, and Sabe Kessel stops with a fish in his hands and somebody at the back asks whether she is all right. Then she gives it to me, and she gives it once instead of twice. Put the lamps astern and not forward, she says. Every man on this pier who has ever gaffed anything at night knows a lamp forward blinds the man on the hook and shows the water what is coming. Astern, low and hooded on the seaward side. That is it. That is all she says, and it is worth more than 3 of Vesadrune's boats, and she says it exactly once and then goes back to her beam, and she does not weigh anything for about a minute. Ione comes back off the ice boat on the 8th day with the physician's answer in her mouth, and the answer is no. Not this year, not next year, and not by that man or any man on Cutler Street. The scarring is not on the front of her eye, as Ilse Vantry was told. It is behind it, and it has been behind it since she was 11, and there is nothing under it to open. He did not charge the 4 gold. Hesapel says he sat with her for 2 hours and drew her a picture of her own eye with her fingers on the paper so that she would have it, and then would not take the money. She comes up the ladder and tells me all of that in about 6 sentences, standing in her own doorway, and then she puts her hand on the side of my neck where the band is and comforts me about it. That is what happens. I am not going to arrange it into something else. My wife comes home with the answer that she is blind for the rest of her life, and she spends the first quarter of an hour of it with her hand on my neck, telling me that she is all right, and she is not pretending, and I have never in my life been so thoroughly outclassed by another person. Then she asks for the tiller, not a seat in the boat and not a thwart out of the way. The tiller, on the night, on the deep boat, with 4 holes working to her order. Because I can tell you where a thing that size is by the sound it makes, she says, and not one of your 12 men can do that, and you cannot do it and hold a hook at the same time. Then I ask her to come out past the last bar with me. She makes me ask her twice. She stands there and lets the first one go by entirely, as I let hers go by on the boards in front of 40 people, and I have to say it again from the beginning and better. And she says yes to me in her own doorway, on the second asking, and she does not make anything else of it. The plan gets said once, out loud on the boards with the whole pier standing there on the evening before we go. Slack water an hour before dawn, at the west shoulder in the old scour, because that is where she lies when she goes down, and she lies still in it. Piet Vane says that part himself, standing up, and nobody helps him with a word of it. 4 boats, Vesadrune's in a square, boot astern, with the long tackle off her ice hull rigged across 2 of them, because no single hull on this river will hold that weight, and 4 of them lashed will. Ice up from Ardenmouth on the flood at Ilse Vantry's rate, which is nothing, and she has sent it without being asked and without a note in it. Lamps astern, low, hooded on the seaward side. Bet Onslow gets that said in her own words with her hand on the beam, and the pier says the second half of it with her. 12 men. Ovi Knack, Roltesk, Eber Small, Loman Frey and his hat, Ansi Roby, who comes back on his own and whose wife stands on the boards while he says so, and 6 of Vesadrune's. Hesapel on my deck at 14 coppers a Friday. Dab on the deck line and not in the bow of anything, and Ione Kessel on the tiller of the deep boat and my own hands on the hook. Sabe Kessel repeats the last 3 words of about 9 separate pieces of that plan over the course of the evening, and by the end of it 2 of Vessa's men have started saying them with him, and he has come round to explaining the lamps to a downriver skipper as though he had thought of it himself. Erla Kessel is in the storeroom that night with her second son, and they are doing nothing important, and she is looking for a jar. She tells him she is glad he has the scale work. She says the pier is a good place for a man who is careful, and that his father was never careful, and that she has always thought Sabi had his grandfather's hands. Then she says the only kind thing she says in all the time I know her, which is that she is glad he did not get a boat because a boat would have taken him. He does not answer her. He stands there with the jar in his hands, and he does not say the last 3 words of it, and after a while she goes back to looking for her jar. Go on the tide. The pier turns out at 3 in the morning to watch 4 boats go down the channel with the lamps hooded, and there are 240 people on those boards in the dark. And Ione Kessel goes out past the last bar for the first time since she was 13 years old and asked her father with her hand on a tiller, and the whole delta stands there and watches her go. Slack water an hour before dawn at the west shoulder of the cut, and 4 boats lashed in a square with the long tackle rigged across 2 of them, and the lamps astern and hooded on the seaward side as Bet Onslow said it once and not twice. 12 men, ice in the hold of the 5th hull, and my wife on the tiller of the deep boat with her hand on the wood and her head turned slightly away from all of us, listening. She has that water in her ears. She has had it in her ears since she was 11, from a floor 11 feet above it. And out here, with no boards under her and no wall to put a hand on, she is the only person in this delta who knows what she is hearing. West of the tackle, Cal, she says, coming up the scour on the slack, 40 feet off and low, and going slow with it. Ovi Knack looks over the side at 300 yards of flat black water with nothing whatever on it, and puts his lamp down and does what she says. That one is hers, and it is not mine. 4 holes on a woman's word, in the dark, and she gets it right 11 times running, and the 12th time she gets it right about a minute and a half before I can hear it myself. I go down at the second slack with 3 wraps of the line on my fist and the bite of the long tackle over my shoulder, 60 feet, and I have the eyes for it now, and the cold does not shut my hands, and I have 9 minutes in my chest because 240 people ate off my boards this week. She is lying in the old scour under the west shoulder exactly where a man on a pier with a pipe in his teeth said she would be lying. And what I do next is not brave. I want that flat and plain, because this delta will be telling it the other way inside a month, and I am not having it. A thing that size is not killed by a man. It is killed by 4 boats, a tackle, ice, and a plan, and by a boy on a deckline, and by a woman who can tell you where it is with her eyes shut, and my part in it is the part nobody else on this river can do, which is to go down there and put the bite where it has to go, under the jaw and out behind the gill. That is the whole of it. Everything on the top of her is armor, and everything behind that gill is engine, and the one place on her that will take a bite without cutting it is the hollow under the jaw where the water goes in. So I put it there. Twice, because the first one comes off, and going back the second time takes longer than everything else I do that night. Then I come up and get myself out of the water, and my wife takes the slack out of the tackle herself by ear off the sound of it. 4 boats lift and go over onto their beam ends. Everybody in pile water on those boards, 3/4 of a mile off. Hear 4 hulls come out of the water, and hear 12 men not shouting. Then she comes for us. She swings up out of the scour and along the side of us and puts her shoulder into the deep boat, and I am on the rail with the hook and the deck goes out from under my feet, and I go into that water off the wrong side of the hull with nothing at all in my hands. Open water. No line, no warp, no rail. 60 feet under me and nothing on the top of it to hold, and I go rigid the way I went rigid in the slack with a plank on my back, and I am a man who has never learned to swim 1 stroke in 22 years on top of the sea. Dab has the deck line. He does not shout for help, and he does not tell anybody. He takes 2 turns off his cleat and throws the tail of it out over the top of me, and it comes down across my chest, and I get my fist into it, and I am a working man again in about a second and a half. Then he coils the rest of it in and says, to the 4 men behind him who are all looking at the tackle and not at me, that the deep water has gone in after the bite again. Nobody on that boat ever finds out. He is 11 years old, and he lies to a deck full of grown men for me without being asked and without being thanked, and he never mentions it to anybody, and neither do I. It takes an hour and 20 minutes after that, and she does not go easily, and she never once goes stupidly. And at the end of it, there are 4 hulls low in the water, and 1 animal alongside them with the tackle still on her, and the sky going gray behind the reed banks. We bring her up the cut on the flood at dawn, and there are 240 people on the boards at Pilewater, and every one of them goes quiet the way that pier went quiet on my first morning, and this time it goes on for a great deal longer, because it takes the town about half a minute to understand the length of what is coming up the channel. We get her half up onto the boards with the tackle and 11 men and the whole town hauling, and her head and 1 shoulder come up onto the planks and the boards take it, and the rest of her stays in the water because nothing built on this river would hold her. Her jaw comes up off those planks as high as a doorway. Ione comes down the ladder and along the boards with her hand out for the post, and she stops in front of it, and she puts her hand on a tooth as long as her own forearm. She does not flinch. She has not flinched at anything I have put into her hands since the piece of the sawnose on the first morning, and she stands there on a wet pier at dawn with her palm flat on the thing this delta has been frightened of for 60 years, and her chin up. Polar Kessel stands 11 feet away on his mother's old boards with his mouth open, and he does not tap the rail once. Vesadrune says out loud what all of it means, and out of everybody on that pier, she is the first one to get there. The channel is open, she says. The run comes up on the turn. Every hull on this river goes onto that water tomorrow, and the delta does not go short through the dry. That is what has been landed on this pier this morning. Then she says the other thing, which is that the water is worked and not held anymore, and that a channel a man holds alone is a channel that shuts when he does. And then the delta says the word. It comes off the town end first, out of somebody I do not see, and it goes down the boards in about 4 seconds, and by the time it reaches the far mooring, the entire pier is saying it at once. Deep water. There has not been a holder of that title on the Asa in 60 years, and it is not mine to take, and I do not take it, and it is said at me and about me and over the top of me by a town, and that is the only way a thing like that has ever been handed to anybody. Then I go and put a proposition to Vesadrun in front of witnesses on the boards, because that was the fourth of her terms. I offer her the partnership she offered me on the water day. Her hulls, her crews, her ice, my water, and the same split she named the first time. She names her own terms instead, as she said she would, and they are harder than the ones she offered in the spring, and every one of them is fair. And the last of them is a hull. 32 feet, built in this delta and not in Ardenmouth, out of her yard money, with the deep gear on her and iron on the nose, and Ione Kessel's name burnt into the transom. And she says that part with Ione standing there and asks the woman herself before she asks me. Onslow says the name off the slate twice when it goes onto her book, and Sabe Kessel says it after her. They build the new pier that autumn on the shoulder of the old one, because the old one has a piling out of it and a hand's width drop in the boards. The whole town works on it, and Vesadrun pays for the timber out of the first run, and grandmother's jaw goes up over the town end of it, set on 2 posts, wide enough for 2 men to walk through abreast, and everybody who comes onto that pier from the shore walks under it and out again on the other side. The tooth line runs the length of the boards under the rail on the inside, at the height of a hand, where a woman walking down that pier with her fingers out can count all of it. 36 teeth on it when they put it up. Ione counts it from the beginning, out loud, the way she has counted it every night since the first one. Dab is on the new pier in a coat that is dry, standing up in a hull of his own, being sent for, and then being sent. He runs the boards for 4 boats, and everything anybody on this river needs telling goes through him. He still gets his own count wrong out loud on purpose about once a week, and he knows that I know, and neither of us has ever said so. Piet Vane is at the town end with strangers asking him things. Downriver skippers, Ardenmouth men, 2 of Vessa's new hands. He finishes his sentences now, every one of them, and takes about a quarter of an hour over each, and there is always somebody sitting down. Sookmarin's fried fish is what people talk about. Her gossip is still the best on the Asa, and it is not the thing anymore. Her fish. There is a stall boy now, and he is paid, and everybody knows what he is called. Sabe Kessil and Bet Onslow say every price in unison at the scale, and neither of them has ever once acknowledged that they are doing it, and the whole pier says the second one with the pair of them. Oler Kessel works the far end of the pier his mother used to hold, for a wage, on Vesadrun's book, and he is good at it, and he raps the rail twice before he speaks, and there are men who wait for the sentence now because the sentence has usually got a number in it worth having. Merle Kessel eats at her daughter's table now. She is handed her portion by weight on the little brass scale she kept beside her own plate for 30 years, exactly fair, to the quarter ounce every meal for as long as she lives. Nobody in that house has ever said one word about it. That is the only revenge anybody takes in any of this, and it is taken by a woman who cannot see the beam and does not have to. On the first quiet evening after the run, I eat one hot meal sitting down indoors at my own table, with a door on the room, and nobody standing over me to see how much I take. I eat the whole of it, sitting down. Then, on the top of the tide, I take my wife out past the last bar in the deep boat, in the hull with her own name burnt into the transom of it. I am at the oar, not in the bow. She is on the tiller. The Delta is on the boards to watch her go out, because she asked her father when she was 13, and everybody on this river said no for 8 years, and every one of them wants to be standing there when it stops being true. We go over the last of the sand, and the water underneath us stops arguing and turns deep and quiet. She takes her hand off the tiller and puts it over the side into it and holds it there for a long while and says nothing at all. Paid 8 silver to buy myself back off that board, and I have been the deep water for a month, and the Delta thinks that 8 silver bought a husband. What it actually bought was a woman with a scale of her own, and a boy in a dry coat, and an old man who gets asked things, and one man who found out at the age of 36 that he did not know how to ask for anything. And of the 2 of us who shook on that deal, I got the better of it by a long way, and her mother has never once been told so.
That was never really about the thing on the pier. A man who has been priced can spend his whole life proving the number wrong, and he will still be the only one in the boat. What that man built came out of 2 habits. He fed somebody else first before he ate every single time, and at the end he stood up in front of a whole town and asked 4 people for help out loud, which cost him more than 60 feet of black water ever did. Take that if you take anything. The work makes you useful. Asking is what makes you one of them. And the people who feed you first are worth more than anything you can weigh.